Welcome back to another story on Super Harry. This time, we're bringing you, What If Blood Ritual Found Harry was 55% Atlantean 45% Merlin's heir and Dumbledore blocked both. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Ritual and the Reckoning. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like dust and old shoes and the particular staleness of air that hasn't moved in years. Harry Potter had lived in it for as long as he could remember, and he had long since stopped noticing the smell the way you stop noticing anything that becomes the whole shape of your world. What he did notice, on the morning of his 11th birthday, was the letter. Not the one from Hogwarts, that hadn't arrived yet, wouldn't arrive for another few hours, though Harry didn't know that. This was a different letter. This was a creamy envelope that had been slipped under the cupboard door sometime before dawn, addressed in handwriting he didn't recognize, sealed with dark red wax pressed into the shape of a wave that kept moving even when he held it still. He rubbed his thumb over it twice, convinced he was imagining things. The wave kept moving. He opened it. Harry James Potter, it read. On the occasion of your 11th birthday, you are formally notified that a sealed document exists in your name at Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley. This document was placed in trust by order of the Ancient Accounts Division and may only be opened by you, in person, on this date. The contents pertain to your lineage, your inheritance, and certain matters that have been withheld from you. We advise you not to delay. The goblins are patient. They are not, however, indifferent to inconvenience. Ironclaw, Senior Account Manager, Ancient Accounts Division, Gringotts. Harry read it 3 times. Then he folded it very carefully, tucked it into the waistband of Dudley's old cast-off jeans, and sat in the dark thinking about the word withheld. It was a precise word. Not unknown. Not undiscovered. Withheld. Kept back by someone who had it. He was still thinking about it when Aunt Petunia's voice came through the door like a bucket of cold water. Boy. Breakfast. He ate his single piece of toast standing at the kitchen counter while Dudley unwrapped a mountain of birthday presents at the table, and he thought about the wave in the wax seal, and he thought about the word withheld, and by the time he'd washed his plate he'd made a decision so clean and simple it surprised him. He was going to Diagon Alley. He had no idea where it was. He had no money. He had no way of getting there except walking, and he didn't know which direction to walk. None of these facts changed the decision. They were just logistics, and logistics could be solved. He was 11 years old and he had been solving the logistics of surviving the Dursleys since before he knew what the word meant. He was halfway to the front door when Uncle Vernon came around the corner with a cup of tea and a newspaper and nearly walked directly into him. Where do you think you're going? Vernon said, looking down at him the way he always looked at him, like Harry was a problem he'd failed to solve. Out, Harry said. You are not going out, boy, you are going to. I'm going out, Harry said again, with the same flat certainty, and something in his voice, something he hadn't used before, something that felt like it came from a place lower and older than his lungs, made Vernon stop mid-sentence and stare. The teacup cracked in Vernon's hand. A clean split, right down the middle, tea running down his fingers. He didn't seem to notice. Harry walked out the front door. He didn't look back. He found Diagon Alley the way he found most things, by following something he couldn't name and didn't fully trust, a kind of magnetic pull in his sternum that said this way when he turned left at the corner of Magnolia Crescent, and yes when the postman outside the Leaky Cauldron gave him a slightly too long look and then pointedly looked away. The Leaky Cauldron was dim and smelled like fire whiskey and old wood and something faintly sulphurous that Harry decided not to think about. The people inside looked at him, the way they always looked at him, that particular look he'd grown up with in the wizarding world, the look of recognition, quick and involuntary, like seeing a face on a coin, and then away again, pretending. He walked straight through to the courtyard, found the bricks, tapped the third from the left, second up, the same way the letter had somehow told him without telling him, and Diagon Alley opened in front of him like a held breath finally released. He had been here before. He was almost sure of it, though the memory was the kind that lives in your hands and feet rather than your head, muscle memory, body memory, the knowledge of cobblestones underfoot. Gringotts was exactly where it should be, at the far end of the alley, white and gleaming and faintly arrogant in the way that only very old institutions can be arrogant. He climbed the steps, nodded at the goblin at the door the way you nod at someone whose job is harder than it looks, and walked inside. "Harry Potter," he said to the first goblin behind the counter. "I have an appointment with Ironclaw. Ancient Accounts Division." The goblin looked at him for a long moment. Then it said, "Identification." Harry placed his hand flat on the counter. He wasn't sure why he did it. It felt right. The marble beneath his palm turned warm, then faintly gold, and the goblin blinked, a small, quick, controlled blink that Harry suspected was the goblin equivalent of dropping your jaw. "Follow me," it said. Ironclaw's office was at the end of a corridor that went down 2 levels below the main floor, past doors that hummed with wards Harry could feel rather than see, pressure changes in the air that pressed against his skin and then parted for him like water parting around a moving hand. The goblin behind the desk was old. Not just old, ancient. His skin had the texture of something that had been weathered rather than aged, and his eyes were the color of very deep water. He watched Harry cross the room with an expression of careful, professional interest. "Sit down, Mr. Potter." Harry sat. "You received our letter." "This morning." Ironclaw nodded. "We sent it 11 years ago. Set to deliver on your birthday. We were not certain it would reach you." He paused, and something moved behind his eyes. "There are wards on your residence. Old wards. Wards not placed there by your family." "I know," Harry said, though he hadn't known until that exact moment. "Before we proceed to the inheritance documents," Ironclaw said, folding his hands on the desk, "I am required by the Ancient Accounts Charter to offer you the option of a blood inheritance ritual. You are not obligated. However, in cases where lineage has been," another pause, "complicated, the ritual provides clarity that documents alone cannot." "What does it involve?" 3 drops of blood. A silver basin. The ritual itself takes less than 5 minutes. What it reveals takes considerably longer to understand. "Do it," Harry said. Ironclaw didn't smile. Harry suspected goblins had more refined expressions of satisfaction than smiling, but something in his posture shifted fractionally towards something that might have been approval. He produced a silver pin and a basin etched with script so small Harry couldn't read it even when he leaned forward. Harry pricked his finger without flinching. 3 drops fell into the basin, and then the world changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way that looked spectacular from the outside. The drops hit the silver and spread, and kept spreading past the edge of any physical logic, a dark red bloom that became a map, that became a web, that became a language Harry couldn't read but could somehow hear, low and resonant, like music played in a register just below normal hearing. Then the basin went gold. Then it went the color of the deep ocean on a clear day, that particular blue-green that exists about 30 feet below the surface where the sunlight still reaches but has already begun to change. Ironclaw was very still. "What is that?" Harry asked. "That," Ironclaw said, and his voice was different now, quieter, with an edge of something Harry would later recognize as reverence, "is Atlantean blood." The word sat in the air between them. "Atlantean," Harry said. As in the civilization that predates every magical institution currently in existence. As in the source tradition from which modern wizardry is a derivative. As in, Ironclaw stopped himself, took a breath. 55%, Mr. Potter. More than half of your magical lineage traces directly to Atlantean descent. The basin pulsed again. A second color rose through the blue-green, something older, earthier, silver-gold, the color of lightning caught in amber. "And that?" Harry asked, though some part of him already knew. "Merlinian descent. Merlin's own bloodline, through your mother's family. 45%. Ironclaw looked at him with those deep water eyes. In the recorded history of Gringotts, across nearly 3,000 years of blood rituals, we have never seen a reading like this. Not once. A convergence of Atlantean heritage and direct Merlinian descent, combined in a single living individual. He folded his hands again. You are not simply an heir, Mr. Potter. You are a confluence. The only one we know of. Harry was quiet for a moment. The basin was still glowing, still pulsing with those two distinct, beautiful, impossible colors. He watched it the way you watch a fire, not moving, just taking it in. Someone knew this, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And blocked it. Yes. Ironclaw reached into a drawer and produced a folder. There are suppression enchantments on your magical core. They are old work, extraordinarily skilled, calibrated to allow just enough power through that no one would notice the restriction. To anyone observing you, you would appear to be a moderately gifted child, perhaps slightly above average. He placed the folder on the desk. These enchantments were placed when you were 14 months old. By who? Ironclaw opened the folder. At the top of the first page, in neat, precise script that Harry would have recognized anywhere, was the name, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry looked at it for a long time. He didn't feel the anger the way he expected to, not as heat, not as something rushing up through his chest. It came in quiet and cold instead, the way water fills a room rather than flooding it. Steady. Rising. Thorough. Can they be removed? He asked. Yes. They are not permanent bindings. They were designed to be temporary, to be removed when he judged the time was right. A pause. They were never removed. Remove them, Harry said. Now. Mr. Potter, I must advise you that the release of suppressed Atlantean and Merlinian magic simultaneously could be, I understand, Harry said. Remove them. Ironclaw looked at him for a long, considering moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of someone agreeing to something they know will change everything. It will require the ritual chamber. Come. The ritual chamber was 3 more levels down, in the oldest part of the bank, where the stone walls had the look of having been there before the building was built around them. 4 goblin ritualists were waiting when they arrived, arranged at the cardinal points of a circle etched into the floor. The circle itself glowed faintly, and Harry recognized the script now. It was the same script from the basin, the same language his blood had spoken. Stand at the center, Ironclaw said. Do not brace yourself. Do not resist what comes. That is the only instruction that matters. Harry stood at the center of the circle. The ritualists began to chant in gobbledygook, low and rhythmic, and the circle brightened. Harry felt the enchantments on his core the way you feel a bandage that's been on too long, a pressure that had become so constant it had stopped registering as pressure at all. He felt them now because they were moving, shifting, beginning to pull away like a tide going out. And then they broke. It wasn't painful. That was the first thing. He had expected pain. What he got instead was the opposite of pain, an opening, like a window thrown wide in a room that has been sealed for a decade, and the air that came through was cold and salt-sharp and carried in it the smell of deep water and green things and lightning before a storm. His magic came back into him like the sea reclaiming its shore. He didn't shout. He didn't fall. He stood with his feet planted in the center of the circle and he breathed through it, in and out, and the air around him went still in a way that air doesn't normally go still, absolutely, completely still, no current, no movement, and the candles on the walls burned perfectly straight for one long moment before they blazed, all of them at once, 3 times their height. The ritualists stopped chanting. The silence was enormous. Then the candles settled. The circle stopped glowing. Harry rolled his shoulders once, like a man who's just set down a heavy bag after a very long walk, and looked up. Ironclaw was watching him from outside the circle with an expression that Harry would later think was the closest a goblin ever got to awe. "How do you feel?" the goblin asked. Harry considered the question seriously. He felt like the sky before a storm. He felt like the first word of a language he'd always understood but never been allowed to speak. He felt like himself, entirely and for the first time. "Fine," he said. "I feel fine." The inheritance documents took another 2 hours, and they were extraordinary. The Potter estate alone was considerable, old money, old holdings, a vault that made Harry blink when he saw the number. But the Atlantean inheritance was something else entirely. There was property he didn't have words for yet, artifacts in Gringotts' deepest vaults that couldn't be moved by anything other than his specific bloodline, texts in that water script language that the goblins had been holding in custodianship for 300 years, waiting for an heir with enough Atlantean blood to claim them. And through his mother's line, the Merlinian inheritance. A seat on a council Harry had never heard of. Properties in 3 countries. A wand-crafting heritage that predated Ollivander's family by 8 centuries. And a title. Emry's heir. The legal successor to Merlin's own recognized position in the magical governance structure of Britain, a position that had been sitting empty for 1,000 years because no one had ever carried enough of the blood to claim it. What does Emry's heir actually mean? Harry asked, pushing the parchment back across the desk. In practical terms, Ironclaw said, it means you have standing before the Wisengamot that supersedes the Minister for Magic. It means certain ancient laws apply to you that do not apply to other witches and wizards. It means, he paused for effect, that Hogwarts school charter, which was written under Merlin's authority, requires the school to accommodate any request made by the Emry's heir regarding their own education. Harry sat with that for a moment. He knew about all of this too. Yes. The Emry's claim was sealed by the same hand that placed the suppressions. So he blocked the Atlantean power, and he buried the Merlinian title, and he put me in a cupboard in Surrey and waited. Harry's voice was very level. What was he waiting for? Ironclaw was quiet for a beat. That, Mr. Potter, I cannot tell you with certainty. But I can tell you that the suppression enchantments were calibrated on a timer. They were set to release when you turned 17. The year I'd have graduated Hogwarts, Harry said. The year you would have finished 6 years of Dumbledore's personal instruction, Ironclaw corrected gently. Shaped by his curriculum. Trained in his methods. Grateful to him for everything he'd given you. Loyal. Harry looked at the folder with Dumbledore's name on it and felt the cold water rise another inch. What can I do about it? He asked. Legally. A great deal, Ironclaw said, and this time there was no question, the goblin was smiling. Shall I explain your options? Yes, Harry said. All of them. He was back on the street outside Gringotts by early afternoon, a money pouch in his pocket and a head full of things that would take weeks to fully unpack. The sun was still up. Diagon Alley was still busy. Children were pulling parents toward quality Quidditch supplies, and an owl was sitting on a lamppost looking judicial, and everything was exactly as it had been 3 hours ago except that Harry Potter was not the same person who had walked in. He stood at the top of the Gringotts steps for a moment, looking down the length of the alley, and he thought about Dumbledore's name on that folder and Dumbledore's careful, precise enchantments on his core and the 14 months he had been alive, barely walking, not yet talking, when someone had decided he was too dangerous to be allowed to be himself. He didn't hate Dumbledore. He wanted to understand that clearly, at least for now. He didn't hate him. What he felt was something more like the cold, complete certainty of someone who has just discovered that the map they were given was drawn wrong on purpose. You couldn't hate the map. But you also couldn't use it anymore. He bought himself a proper wand first, Ollivander's, because the goblins had strongly suggested it and because something about the shop felt right, like a room he'd been in before in a dream. Ollivander himself moved around him with an expression caught between professional delight and something much more unsettled, measuring and measuring, making small sounds under his breath. The wand that chose him was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and when it found him there was that warmth and the shower of sparks, but there was also something else, a low, resonant harmonic that Ollivander hadn't heard before, a sound the wand made that seemed to come from somewhere other than just the wood and feather. Ollivander held it for just a moment after Harry had set it down, listening. "Curious," Ollivander said softly. "Very," Harry agreed, and took his wand. He bought robes next, and a cauldron, and an owl, white, imperial, clever-eyed, who looked at him from her perch with the focused intelligence of someone who has found what she was looking for. He named her Hedwig because the name came to him fully formed, like something remembered rather than invented. He was passing Flourish and Blots when the Hogwarts letter caught up with him, delivered not by a school owl but by a small, fast, grey bird that dropped it directly into his hand and was gone before he could look at it twice. The parchment was thick and cream-colored and smelled faintly of chalk and something old. He opened it, read it, folded it back up. Then he went into Flourish and Blots and bought every book on the first-year list, and then he went to a different section, a part of the shop that required you to go through a low door in the back wall, and he bought 3 other books, one on Atlantean magical theory, which the shopkeeper produced from under the counter with an expression of mild shock that someone his age was asking for it, one on Merlinian bloodline traditions, and one that was simply titled Ancient Accounts in That Water. Script that Harry was beginning to be able to read without quite knowing how. He tucked them all into his trunk, a good one, proper wizard's trunk, bought new and charmed to be lighter than it should be, and he stood in the alley with Hedwig on his arm in the long golden light of late afternoon and thought about September 1st and Hogwarts and a school charter written under Merlin's authority. And he thought about Albus Dumbledore, who would be there, who would smile at him with those half-moon glasses and those kind, assessing eyes, who would expect to find the boy he'd prepared, grateful, loyal, shaped. He thought about what that man would find instead. The Hogwarts letter required him to have a guardian's signature for certain forms, and the forms themselves created a problem he solved in the Gringotts way, through legal channels, through the Emery's claim, through a document filed that afternoon with the Ministry of Magic's Creature and Being Division that legally designated the Gringotts Ancient Accounts Division as temporary custodian of Harry Potter's scholastic documentation. Ironclaw had been very helpful about this. Ironclaw, Harry was beginning to understand, had been waiting for someone to make these particular moves for a very long time and was enjoying himself enormously. He found a room at the Leaky Cauldron for the rest of the summer. Tom the barkeep barely glanced at his name and this suited Harry perfectly. He sat in the small, slanted room above the pub with Hedwig on the windowsill and the oil lamp burning and the Ancient Accounts book open on his lap, and he read. The book was not what he expected. It wasn't a history, exactly, and it wasn't a textbook. It was something closer to a series of letters, written by Atlantean scholars to their students, across generations, in the voice of people who were trying to communicate not just knowledge but way of seeing. Atlantean magic, they kept saying, was not the same as what the surface world called magic. It didn't work through the casting model, wand, word, will directed outward. It worked through integration. The magic was not something you did. It was something you were, and learning to use it was less like learning a skill and more like learning to breathe properly after a lifetime of shallow breaths. Harry read until 2 in the morning, and the next day he started doing what the book described, which was mostly sitting very still and paying attention to himself, to the way his magic moved and rested and responded, to the difference in texture between what he now recognized as his inherited Atlantean core, vast, deep, pressurized, like water under a submerged mountain, and the Merlinian strand woven through it, bright and articulate and precise like a language in itself. He had a month before Hogwarts. He used all of it. Not training in the dramatic sense, he wasn't performing feats of power in his small room above the Leaky Cauldron, wasn't blowing things up for practice. He was doing something more fundamental. He was getting acquainted with the actual shape and nature of what he was. The suppressions had been like living with a river dammed at its source for 10 years, now the dam was gone, and the task wasn't to control the flood but to understand the watershed. He practiced small things. Candle flames that responded to his attention rather than his wand. Water in a glass that moved when he asked rather than commanded. He practiced reading the water script until it became as natural as English. He wrote letters to Ironclaw about the Emery's claim and the next legal steps. He read every book on his Hogwarts list and found them simultaneously basic and interesting, basic because the framework they described was the simplified modern derivative that the Atlantean scholars had already explained the origin of, interesting because you could see, in the bones of every spell structure, the deeper principles that had been translated imperfectly from older knowledge. He was not a weapon, was the thing. He was not preparing to be a weapon. He was preparing to be informed, which was different, and which made him, he suspected, considerably more dangerous. On the last night of August, Harry sat on the windowsill of his leaky cauldron room with Hedwig asleep on his shoulder and the rooftops of London spread out under a clear sky, and he let himself think about his parents for the first time since the ritual. His mother. Lily Potter, née Evans. 45% Merlinian blood, which meant she had known, had she known. Or had that knowledge been blocked from her too, inherited without context, the power present and the name absent? There was a lot in the Merlinian inheritance documents about Lily Evans' line, about the Evans family's long, quiet slide from awareness of their own heritage, about the specific moment, 2 generations back, when the knowledge had been lost. Not suppressed. Just lost. Allowed to go quiet in the way that old things go quiet when no one tends them. She hadn't known. He was almost sure of it. She had been brilliant and powerful and strange in her magic in ways that even the Hogwarts accounts noted with some confusion, but she hadn't known why. His father's family had kept the Atlantean blood for generations, carefully, quietly, a tributary of the old bloodline that had gone underground in the way that Atlantean descendants often did, not hiding exactly, but not advertising either, maintaining their heritage through practices that looked to outsiders like unusual family traditions. His grandmother, Doria Potter. Her maiden name had been Black, but her blood, her actual blood, had been something much older than either family's records showed. He thought about his parents and he thought about the ritual and the word withheld and he thought about 14 months old, just walking, not yet talking, and someone had come and had put careful hands on him and had decided on his behalf what kind of wizard he was allowed to become. He wasn't angry about it tonight. Tonight it just made him sad in a simple, clean way, the sadness of a missed thing, a thing that should have been his that wasn't. That would have mattered. He could hold the sadness and the clarity at the same time. He was good at holding things at the same time. Hedwig made a small sound in her sleep and shifted her weight slightly on his shoulder, and Harry put one finger against her feathers gently. Tomorrow, he told her. She didn't answer, but her expression, even sleeping, was perfectly confident. He climbed back inside, closed the window, and went to sleep. In the morning, he was going to Hogwarts. And Albus Dumbledore, with his half-moon glasses and his careful plans and his very good reasons, was going to have to look at what his careful hands had made and reckon with the fact that it had not stayed what he shaped it to be. It had become what it actually was. Harry Potter, 55% Atlantean, 45% Merlin's heir, 11 years old and not afraid of anything, was going to walk into that castle and be exactly what he was, out loud, with the lights on. Whatever came next could come. He was ready for it. Chapter 2, The Weight of Old Names. The Hogwarts Express left from platform 9 3/4 at exactly 11 o'clock, and Harry arrived at King's Cross at 10:15 with his trunk, his owl, and the particular kind of calm that comes not from the absence of nerves but from having already decided nothing is going to rattle you. He found the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, watched a freckled boy about his age walk straight through it with a trolley piled high enough to be structurally questionable, and followed him through without breaking stride. The Scarlet engine was already breathing steam into the cool September air, and the platform was loud with families and owls and the specific brand of organized chaos that happens when several hundred children are all trying to be in the same place at the same time. Harry loaded his trunk, settled Hedwig in a compartment near the back of the train, and was sitting quietly with ancient accounts open on his lap when the compartment door slid open and the same freckled boy leaned in with the expression of someone who has already checked every other compartment and is beginning to feel the social pressure of the situation. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "Can I sit here?" "Go ahead," Harry said. The boy dropped into the seat opposite with the boneless ease of someone who has grown up in a house too small for the number of people in it. He had red hair and a smudge of something on his nose and the look of someone who finds most things genuinely interesting. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley." Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went immediately to his forehead, the automatic flicker everyone did, then back to his face. He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed about it. Right. Yeah. Sorry. Everyone does that, don't they? Pretty much, Harry said. My brothers have talked about you for years. Fred and George, they're in third year. And Percy's a prefect, which he mentions every 30 seconds. Ron pulled a package of something from his pocket and unwrapped it with the efficiency of long practice. Want one? My mum packed loads. Sure, Harry said, and accepted half a sandwich. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the train picking up speed through the outskirts of London, the city giving way to suburbs giving way to the open green spread of countryside. Ron glanced at the book in Harry's lap with the polite curiosity of someone who has decided to be interested in whoever they're sitting with. What's that? Harry held up the spine. Ancient accounts, in the water script. Ron squinted at it. Can't read that. What language is that? Atlantean, Harry said. Ron blinked. Like, the Atlantis Atlantean? Is there another kind? I didn't think anyone could still read that. My dad's mentioned it once or twice, he works at the ministry, he's obsessed with anything old and unusual, but I thought it was basically a dead language. Like, even the unspeakables can only translate bits of it. It's not that hard once you stop trying to translate it and just let it work the way it works, Harry said. He turned the book toward Ron. See how the script moves slightly. It's not decorative. The movement is part of the meaning. Each word has a static component and a kinetic component. You read both simultaneously. Ron stared at the moving script with the expression of someone watching a magic trick who has not yet decided whether to be impressed or skeptical. How do you know this? I had a month with not much else to do, Harry said. That was true as far as it went, and also not the whole answer, which was that the language came to him the way swimming comes to someone who grew up near water, not learned exactly, more like recognized. His blood remembered it. He'd just given it space to remember. Ron leaned back in his seat with a thoughtful expression that Harry found more interesting than the odd stammering he'd half expected. You know, you're not what I was expecting. What were you expecting? Honestly? My brothers made it sound like you'd either be brilliant and know it or brilliant and pretend you didn't. Like there was no middle ground with Harry Potter. Ron unwrapped another piece of food. You seem like you're just a person. That's the goal, Harry said. The compartment door opened again mid-morning, and this time it was a girl with wild brown hair and a slightly combative expression, holding a book of her own and followed by a round-faced boy who looked like he'd been crying recently and was trying very hard to pretend he hadn't. Have either of you seen a toad? The girl asked. This boy has lost his. We've been up and down the train twice. Haven't seen a toad, Harry said. Sit down if you want. We'll keep an eye out. The girl sat with the efficiency of someone who has places to be and is choosing to pause at this one. The round-faced boy sat next to her and looked grateful for the rest. I'm Hermione Granger, she said, with the brisk directness of someone who has decided the quickest path through social formality is to sprint. And this is Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter. Ron Weasley. Hermione's eyes did the forehead flicker too, but unlike most people she immediately redirected her attention to what was in his hands, which Harry appreciated. Is that ancient accounts? In the original? Yes. I tried to find a translated edition in Diagon Alley. Flourish and Blot said there isn't one. Apparently only 3 copies of the original still exist and they're usually kept at Gringotts. She was looking at the book with a hunger that Harry recognized, it was the same way he looked at it. Can you actually read it? Yes. How? Exposure and a certain amount of blood memory, Harry said. I can try to teach you the phonetic framework if you want. It won't get you to fluency but it'll let you understand the structure. Hermione Granger looked at him the way a very good chess player looks at an opening move they didn't expect but immediately respect. I'd like that. Neville, who had been quiet through this, spoke up with a careful, slightly hesitant voice. Longbottom, Harry said, before Neville had finished whatever he was building toward. Your gran is Augusta Longbottom. Your family has a connection to the old magic traditions. Not Atlantean directly, but, he paused, feeling for the right word, adjacent. There's a word in the old texts for families like yours. Ankoi. It means old-rooted. Neville stared at him. How do you know about my grans? Your family crest has a deep water motif that doesn't match the usual British heraldic conventions. And you looked at the script in this book before Hermione did. You recognized something about it even if you didn't know what you recognized. A long pause. My gran does talk about old traditions, Neville said slowly. She says most families have forgotten things they shouldn't have. I never really understood what she meant. I think I'm starting to, Harry said. Ron was looking between all three of them with the expression of someone who has found themselves at a dinner party considerably more interesting than the one they thought they were attending. So is everyone on this train secretly ancient and magical in ways I don't know about, or, probably not everyone, Harry said. But more people than know it. The castle appeared out of the dark when they crossed the lake in the small boats, and Harry felt it before he saw it, a resonance, deep and structural, like a chord played on an instrument large enough to be the size of a hill. Hogwarts knew things. The stones of it remembered. He could feel the age of it pressing against his senses, warm and complex and absolutely alive in the way that only very old places that have been fed by generations of magic, can be alive. He sat in the bow of one of the boats and let the feeling move through him without trying to analyze it, and when the castle rose out of the dark above them he said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. Around him the other first years were making small sounds of wonder and shock. Ron had gone quiet, tilted back to look up. Hermione's lips were slightly parted. Neville was gripping the side of the boat with both hands and looking at the castle with an expression Harry couldn't quite name, recognition, maybe. Coming home to somewhere you've never been. The boats docked. Professor McGonagall met them in a stone anteroom with her tartan robes and her straight spine and her expression of precisely calibrated authority. She looked at them the way a person looks at something they are responsible for and take that responsibility seriously. Her eyes landed on Harry for a moment, and he saw the same thing in her face that he'd seen in Ironclaw's, a flash of something quickly controlled. She knew who he was, obviously. But there was something beyond recognition. Something more like calculation, or concern, or both wearing the same expression. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly, she said, in a voice that brooked absolutely no nonsense. While you wait, compose yourselves. The sorting hat will determine your house. Pay attention. Show respect. Then she swept back through the doors, and the first years clustered and whispered, and Harry stood slightly apart from the group and felt the castle humming around him and thought about the charter. The Hogwarts Charter, written under Merlin's authority. Requiring the school to accommodate any request made by the Emery's heir regarding their own education. He hadn't decided yet how to use that, or when, but he'd filed the legal documentation with the ministry before leaving London. Ironclaw had sent a copy to the Hogwarts Board of Governors as well, formally notifying them that the Emery's claim had been activated and that the heir was enrolled for the current term. Someone in this building had received that letter. Someone in this building was going to have to respond to it. Harry was curious to see how. The Great Hall was everything it should have been, ceiling charmed to show the night sky, candles floating, for long tables of students turning to watch them walk in. Harry looked at the enchanted ceiling and felt a small, warm appreciation for whoever had done that particular piece of work. It was a good spell. Technically sophisticated, aesthetically perfect. He filed it away. The sorting hat sang its song, which was engaging enough, and then the names began. Granger, Hermione. Gryffindor, in under a minute, and Hermione's expression was exactly what Harry expected, unsurprised but satisfied. Longbottom, Neville. The hat took a while. Harry watched Neville sitting on the stool with his eyes shut and his hands gripping the seat, and he could see the hat working, could feel the slight resonance of it even from across the room, and after nearly 2 full minutes it shouted Gryffindor with what sounded to Harry like the specific satisfaction of having made the right call. Potter, Harry. The hall went the specific silent that only happens when an entire room of people simultaneously remembers they're trying to look casual. Harry walked up to the stool and sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes. Then the hat said, in a voice only he could hear, "Oh." "Hello," Harry said. Not out loud. Just the thought, directed at it. "I have sorted 11,412 students," the hat said. "I have never felt anything like this." That seems to be the general reaction. The Atlantean strand, I can't, it's not structured the way I'm used to. It's not a collection of traits. It's more like a substrate. An environment. Your qualities live inside it the way fish live in an ocean. That's a fairly good description actually. And the Merlinian inheritance. You know I sorted Merlin. Harry hadn't known that. What house? Slytherin, the hat said. Which surprised everyone then too. A pause. You could go anywhere. Genuinely anywhere. I've never had a student where every house would be a correct answer. Ravenclaw would welcome your mind. Slytherin would welcome your power and your strategic thinking. Hufflepuff, put me where I'll do the most good, Harry said. Not where I'll be most comfortable. Not where I'll fit easiest. Where I'll matter. The hat was quiet for a moment. That, it said, with something that sounded like a smile, is exactly what Gryffindor asks of itself. Gryffindor, it shouted. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall, and caught her eyes for just a moment as he did. She was looking at him with an expression so carefully neutral it was itself a kind of message. She was working very hard to look unsurprised, which meant she was surprised. He went to the Gryffindor table and sat next to Hermione, who was already reading the back of her menu with one hand and making notes on a piece of parchment with the other. What took the hat so long with Neville? She asked, without looking up. It was being thorough, Harry said. It was barely 30 seconds with me. You were easy, Harry said. Neville was interesting. Neville, on Harry's other side, went slightly pink but didn't look displeased. Ron dropped into the seat across from Harry with the easy comfort of someone who has decided they're already friends with you. My whole family's been Gryffindor, he said. The hat took about 4 seconds with me. Didn't even bother sitting down properly. He paused. What did it say to you? It was on you for a while. It said hello, Harry said. Ron waited for more. Harry went back to his menu. The feast materialized and was wonderful, and Harry ate with the uncomplicated appetite of someone who grew up in a house where food was a managed resource, and he listened to the conversations around him and mapped the room the way the Atlantean text said to map any new space, not strategically exactly, but attentively, noticing the texture of the energy in each direction, the currents of personality and intention. He noticed Draco Malfoy at the Slytherin table, had noticed him earlier, actually, outside the school, that particular combination of confidence and anxiety that marks someone who needs status to feel safe. He noticed the Weasley twins, who he already liked from the energy of them, a creative restlessness that was clearly channeled into chaos as a form of art. He noticed Professor Quirrell at the head table, who was interesting for the wrong reasons. There was something discordant about him, a double resonance, like a chord with a wrong note in it. And he noticed Professor Dumbledore. The headmaster was at the center of the staff table, magnificent in purple robes, silver hair and beard catching the candlelight, those half-moon glasses balanced on a long nose, and he was looking at the Gryffindor first-year table with an expression of warm, grandfatherly pleasure. When his gaze reached Harry, it paused. Harry met it directly, evenly, without deference and without hostility. Just a look. Just two people looking at each other across a room. Dumbledore's expression changed in a way that was very small and very complete, a slight adjustment, like a man who has reached for something on a shelf and found it slightly heavier than expected. His eyes went to Harry's scar, the automatic gesture, and then back to his face, and what Harry saw in them was not displeasure, not alarm, but something much more thoughtful. He knows, Harry thought. He can feel it. The suppressions are gone and he can feel that they're gone. He looked away first. Not because he was uncomfortable. Because he was done. The dormitory was a round room in the Gryffindor Tower with 5 four-poster beds and a view of the grounds through a window that Neville immediately claimed by putting his plant, a Mimbulus Mimbletonia, which he had named quietly and without apology, on the windowsill next to it. Ron went to sleep quickly, with the ease of someone who has never had trouble sleeping. The other 2 boys, Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas, were still talking in low voices about the feast when Harry lay back on his bed and listened to the castle. He did this for about 20 minutes, just listening to Hogwarts, to the deep, structural hum of it, the particular frequency of all that layered history. Old magic. Very old magic in the foundations, older than the castle itself, the site having been chosen because something was already there, some natural confluence of power that the founders had built on rather than created. He could feel the wards. They were extraordinary, complex, layered, maintained by the school's own magic and touched up by generations of headmasters. He could feel Dumbledore's specific signature in the most recent maintenance, precise, elegant, compassionate in a way that wand work could be compassionate, designed to protect rather than to cage. Except. He reached out carefully with his senses, the way the Atlantean texts described reaching into deep water, not forcing, not demanding, just extending awareness and letting it find what was there. And in the deepest layer of the school's protective magic, under everything, he found something else. Something he recognized the texture of immediately, because he'd spent a month getting acquainted with what it felt like when applied directly to him. A suppression structure. Woven into the castle's foundations. Not targeting him specifically, targeting everyone. A subtle, brilliant, thoroughly deniable suppression of a specific kind of magical awareness, the kind that would let a student who was more than they appeared simply not notice the full extent of what they were. Not blocking power. Not stealing it. Just making sure no one knew what they had until whoever was watching decided to tell them. Harry lay in his bed in the dark and stared at the canopy overhead and thought about that for a long time. Then he thought about Neville, and the hat's 2 minutes, and the old-rooted quality in his blood. He thought about all the students who had passed through these halls for centuries not knowing what they were carrying. He thought about the charter, and the Emery's claim, and the particular legal implications of a headmaster who had built suppression structures into an institution that was supposed to be governed by Merlin's law. He didn't touch the suppression in the foundations. Not yet. It wasn't time for that move. But he noted it, catalogued it, filed it in the part of his mind that was already 3 moves ahead. He fell asleep thinking about charters and water and old names. The next morning was the first day of classes, and Harry discovered that Hogwarts ran on something between organized enthusiasm and low-grade chaos depending entirely on which teacher you were dealing with. Professor Flitwick was wonderful, tiny, precise, delighted by his own subject in a way that genuine passion always produces. He had them attempting Wingardium Leviosa by the end of the first lesson, and Harry performed it on the first try with the particular ease that comes from having spent the previous month doing something similar with unlocking his actual core, Feathers responding to the request before his wand had finished the motion. Flitwick blinked at him. "Excellent, Mr. Potter. Very good indeed. Have you," he stopped, cocked his head slightly. "Have you done any prior study of charm theory?" "Some," Harry said. "What framework?" "Atlantean integration principles rather than the standard casting model. I find it helps to understand what the charm is actually asking the magic to do before working on the technique of asking it." Flitwick stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a small note on his parchment with a slightly trembling hand. "Yes," he said. "Yes, quite right. Very, yes. Carry on." Hermione, next to Harry, levitated her feather on the 3rd try and then immediately started testing variations in wand angle. She nudged his elbow when Flitwick had moved on. Atlantean integration principles, she said under her breath. Is that in ancient accounts? Second chapter. I've been trying to read it phonetically. The moving script keeps, it shifts meaning depending on how fast it moves. The velocity carries the emotional register, Harry said quietly. Factual statements are slow. Warnings are fast. Questions spiral. She looked at the book in his bag with an expression of intense frustration directed entirely at herself. I should have figured that out. You would have, Harry said. Give it another day. She did look at him then, the full attention of someone deciding something. You're genuinely trying to help me understand it, she said. Not just showing off. Showing off would be pointless, Harry said. What would I do with it? Hermione smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. I think we're going to be friends, she said, with the same directness she brought to everything. I think so too, Harry said. Professor McGonagall taught transfiguration with the precision of someone who considers imprecision a moral failing, and Harry appreciated this about her immediately. She transformed her desk into a pig and back again on entry, a casual demonstration of staggering technical skill, performed with complete offhandedness, and then looked at the class over her glasses. Transfiguration is serious magic. It is difficult, exacting, and unforgiving of sloppiness. I will not tolerate nonsense in this classroom. She produced a matchstick for each of them and told them to transform it into a needle. It was a first lesson, deliberately chosen to be almost impossible for a first year using standard technique, so that the ones who could manage any result at all could be identified. Harry looked at his matchstick and thought about what it wanted to be rather than what he wanted to make it. This was the core Atlantean principle, not imposition but conversation. The matchstick had its structure, its material identity. He wasn't asking it to betray that. He was asking it to remember that matter has no preference for one form over another, that wood and metal are the same thing at a deep enough level of structure. The matchstick became a needle in about 4 seconds. Clean, precise, properly pointed. McGonagall appeared at his shoulder so quickly she must have been watching for it. She picked the needle up, turned it over, set it back down. Perfect, she said, which coming from McGonagall in the first transfiguration lesson was the equivalent of most people kneeling in reverence. Have you transfigured before, Mr. Potter? Not formally, Harry said. What framework are you using? Material conversation rather than imposed form, he said. Understanding the object's existing structure before asking it to change. A beat of silence. Where did you encounter that theory? Atlantean integration texts, Harry said. McGonagall looked at him the way she'd looked at him last night when he'd handed back the sorting hat, and this time she didn't try to hide what was in her expression. It was worry. Not of him, about him. There was a difference, and he could tell it. She was worried for him, in the way that someone worries for a person who is walking into a situation larger than they realize. He nearly told her that he realized it perfectly, but decided it wasn't the moment. He would talk to McGonagall. Just not yet. Not here, with 20 students watching. 15 points to Gryffindor, she said, and moved on. The letter arrived at dinner. Not via owl post, this came directly, dropped by a small ministry bird onto the table next to Harry's plate, sealed with the official ministry seal and additionally sealed with a secondary wax impression he recognized, Dumbledore's personal mark. The letter had been opened and resealed. That was interesting. That was, in fact, quite telling. He opened it. Mr. Potter, it read, in the careful language of officialdom stretched over urgency. The Ministry of Magic acknowledges receipt of the Emery's claim filing submitted on your behalf by Gringotts Bank, Ancient Accounts Division, dated August 31st of the current year. This claim is under review by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Ancient Heritage Office. We are required to inform you that the activation of a dormant hereditary claim of this magnitude has certain procedural requirements, including a formal interview with the Heritage Office and a magical verification before the full Wisengamot. We request your attendance at your earliest convenience. Additionally, and here the language shifted slightly, a different voice bleeding through the official phrasing. The headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry requests a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. His office, any evening this week. Harry folded the letter and put it in his robe pocket. Bad news? Ron asked, watching him. Invitation, Harry said. To what? 2 things. A ministry hearing about an inheritance claim. He paused. And a meeting with Dumbledore. Ron's eyebrows went up. Already? You've been here 1 day. He moved fast, Hermione said. She'd been watching him since the letter arrived. That means he's concerned. It means he's used to being the one who controls the timeline, Harry said. He wants to establish the first conversation before I can. Can I ask what the inheritance claim is? Neville said. He'd been quietly present through all of this, attentive in that way of his that was easy to mistake for passivity but was actually very careful listening. Harry considered for a moment. Then he said, Emery's heir claim. Merlin's direct succession through my mother's line. The table went slightly quiet. Not just their corner, the nearest students had heard, the ripple of it moving outward. Ron stared at him. Neville's expression had gone very still, very attentive, in the way he'd looked at the Atlantean script on the train. That's, Ron started. Stopped. Started again. That's a real thing. I thought that was basically a legend. Like, the seat exists on the Wisengamot Charter but it's been empty since Merlin, Harry said. Yes. And Ron looked at him with the frank, slightly helpless expression of someone whose mental model of a situation has just been fundamentally revised. You're just having your first week at school and you're also the heir of Merlin. And 55% Atlantean blood, Harry said. Silence. Right, Ron said. Then, can I still just call you Harry? Please, Harry said sincerely. Hermione pressed her lips together in an expression that was suppressing a laugh. Neville was still quiet, but he had the look of someone whose grandmother's cryptic statements had just started to make a great deal more sense. Harry wrote 2 letters that night, sitting at the desk in the dormitory while the others slept. The first was to Ironclaw, informing him of the ministry request and asking him to arrange legal representation from Gringotts solicitors for the Heritage Office hearing. He sealed it and gave it to Hedwig, who took off from the windowsill with the purposeful air of someone who has a job to do. The second letter was shorter. He addressed it to the headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and wrote, Professor Dumbledore. I received your request for a meeting. I am available Thursday evening after dinner. I want you to know, in advance, that I am aware of the suppressions that were placed on my core at 14 months old. I am aware of who placed them. I am aware of what they were designed to do and when they were designed to be removed. I am not angry with you. I simply wanted you to have accurate information before we sit down together, so that we can speak honestly. I look forward to the conversation. Harry Potter. He read it over once. It was exactly right. Not threatening. Not conciliatory. Just clear. Just the truth placed on the table before the game even began. He sealed it and placed it with the outgoing post, and then he sat for a moment in the dark of the dormitory and listened to the castle breathe around him, that deep, old, structural hum, and he thought about the suppression woven into its foundations and about Neville and about all the students over all the centuries who had passed through these halls carrying something they didn't have names for. He thought about his mother, brilliant and strange, doing extraordinary magic without understanding its own roots. He thought about what it would have meant to her to know. What it would have meant to his father. What it was going to mean for everyone here, once the structures built to keep people small began to be taken apart, one careful, deliberate, completely legal move at a time. He went to bed. The castle hummed around him, patient and old and full of things that had been waiting to be remembered. Outside the tower window, Hedwig's white shape crossed the face of the moon, carrying his words toward the headmaster's office, small and bright and impossible to ignore. Harry closed his eyes and felt the weight of old names settling around him like armor and thought, with the simple satisfaction of someone who has found the right road after a long walk in the wrong direction. Good. Now we begin. Chapter 3, Hogwarts and the Hollow Boy. Thursday came with rain. Not dramatic rain, not the kind that rattles windows and makes you feel like something is about to happen. This was the gray, patient, English variety that just settles in and makes itself comfortable, turning the grounds into a smudged watercolor of themselves and filling the corridors with the smell of wet wool and damp stone. Harry noticed it the way he noticed everything these days, with interest, without judgment. He had 4 classes before dinner and Dumbledore after it. Potions was first. Professor Snape arrived the way a weather system arrives. The whole room changed when he walked in, pressure dropping, students sitting slightly straighter and slightly more careful. He was tall and pale and moved with the considered economy of someone who has decided that wasted motion is a moral failing. Harry watched him cross to the front of the room with genuine interest. The man was powerful. Not in the way that announced itself but in the quiet, compressed way of something that has been refined over a long time. Snape took the register. When he reached Harry's name he paused. Not long, less than a second, but Harry caught it. "Ah," Snape said. "Harry Potter." He said it the way you say the name of a chapter in a book you have complicated feelings about. "Our new celebrity." Several Slytherins made sounds of appreciation. Harry said nothing. "Tell me, Potter," Snape continued, beginning to walk between the benches with his hands folded behind his back, "what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Several hands went up around the room. Harry's did not. "I don't know," Harry said. Snape turned. "You don't know." His voice carried the exact amount of contempt that Harry had expected. "Fame clearly isn't everything. Asphodel and wormwood make the draught of living death," Harry said. "You already know that I know that. You're testing to see if I'll perform on command." Silence. Absolute, total silence, the kind that happens when a room of people simultaneously holds their breath. Snape looked at him. A long, flat, measuring look. 10 points from Gryffindor, he said, for impertinence. "That seems fair," Harry said pleasantly. Snape's eyes narrowed fractionally. Harry met them without blinking. He wasn't being aggressive, he was genuinely calm, and he thought Snape could probably tell the difference, which was precisely what was interesting about watching the man process it. Snape was accustomed to students who were either performing confidence or performing submission. Harry was neither performing. He just was. Hermione, sitting next to Harry, had her hand still raised from the question about asphodel. She lowered it slowly when it became clear Snape had moved on from wanting an answer. The lesson itself was interesting. Snape was a genuinely brilliant teacher when he chose to be, and he chose to be about 30% of the time, the rest was theater, designed to keep students off balance. Harry followed the boil-cure potion instructions with attention and found the process meditative in the way that any precise, sequential craft can be meditative. He didn't rush. He didn't show off. He just worked cleanly and carefully, and at the end of the lesson his potion was the correct shade of pale pink and entirely without lumps. Snape examined it with the thoroughness of someone who would genuinely prefer to find a flaw. He found none. He moved on without comment, which Harry suspected was the closest Snape came to a compliment in the first week of term. "He hates you," Ron said cheerfully, as they packed up. "He's testing me," Harry said. "It's different." "Is it?" "Hate is simple. Tests are more interesting." Defense against the dark arts was a different kind of uncomfortable. Quirrell's classroom smelled of garlic, which Harry had been told was supposed to ward off vampires and which struck him as both ineffective and deeply optimistic. Quirrell himself was all nervous smiles and hesitations, the performance of timidity so thorough it had clearly become second nature. He spoke in a quavery voice about the importance of defense and the terrible dangers of the dark arts and kept glancing toward the back of the room as though expecting something to arrive. Harry sat in the front row and watched him and felt it again, that discordant double resonance, the wrong note in the chord. Stronger in this room than it had been in the great hall. Something underneath the anxiety, something that wasn't Quirrell at all, old and cold and faintly familiar in the way that some threats are familiar, not because you've met them but because you carry the memory of them in your blood. He didn't say anything. He took notes on Quirrell's fumbling lecture about vampiric defense and answered the questions he was asked and didn't let on that every time Quirrell turned his back Harry was reading the magical resonance of the room the way the Atlantean texts described reading deep water currents, not the surface, not the waves, the thing underneath that tells you which direction everything is actually moving. After class Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor. She had her notebook out and was reviewing her notes while walking, which was an impressive feat of spatial coordination. "Quirrell is hiding something," she said, without looking up. "Yes," Harry said. "What?" "I'm not sure yet. But whatever it is lives at the back of his head more than it lives in the room. The garlic is misdirection, it makes the whole setup seem absurd enough that you don't look past it." Hermione lowered her notebook. "You can tell where something is located within a person. When the magical signature is distinct enough from the person carrying it, yes. It's a resonance reading." He paused. "Think of it like hearing a piece of music. If someone is playing two songs simultaneously, you can tell them apart if you listen past the surface noise." She considered this for 5 full seconds, which with Hermione meant she was being serious. "And Quirrell is playing 2 songs. More like 1 song and a scream," Harry said. She looked at him. He looked back. "I think we should keep an eye on him," she said. "I've been doing that since the feast," Harry said. "Right," she said, and put her notebook away. "Of course you have." Herbology in the greenhouses was the best part of the day, partly because of the greenhouses themselves, warm and green and smelling of earth and growing things, the magic in them quiet and old and comfortable in the way that plant-based magic always was, patient rather than urgent, and partly because of Neville. Neville Longbottom in a greenhouse was a different person than Neville Longbottom anywhere else. The round-faced, slightly anxious boy who apologized for his own presence in corridors became, the moment he got his hands in soil, someone with knowledge and authority and the specific confidence of a person working in their genuine element. Professor Sprout noticed within the first 10 minutes and started directing questions at him with increasing interest and frequency. Neville answered without hesitating, hands moving with practiced ease among the plants, repotting his mandrake with a technique that was noticeably better than the instructions they'd been given. "Where did you learn that grip?" Sprout asked, leaning over to watch. "My gran," Neville said. "She says the old way is always more efficient." "She's absolutely right." Sprout beamed. 5 points to Gryffindor. Harry was next to him, working on his own mandrake with less natural expertise but more attentiveness, listening to the plant the way he'd learned to listen to things that were alive and had their own kind of knowing. "You're good at this," he said to Neville. Neville shrugged with the reflexive modesty of someone who has been told too many times that he's not good enough at the things that matter. "Plants are easy," he said. "They just want to be understood." "That's how most things work," Harry said. Neville looked at him. "You said something on the train," he said, carefully. "About my family. About old rooted. My gran has a word, she doesn't use it often but I've heard it. She says the Longbottoms have long water in them." He paused. "I've never known what it meant." "It's related to the Atlantean word Daiwath," Harry said. "It means a family that carries old magic in its lineage without being fully Atlantean. Like a river that runs through ancient rock, the rock shapes the water even after the water moves on." Neville was quiet for a moment, turning this over. "So there's something in me that's old," Harry said simply. "Deep. And probably considerably more than you've been led to believe." Another pause. "My parents," Neville said, and his voice changed quality, became carefully level in the way that people are careful with things that are both precious and painful. "They were Aurors. They were powerful. Everyone always says I'm nothing like them." He pulled a mandrake from its pot with a practiced motion. I've been trying to figure out if that's true. It's not, Harry said. You just haven't been given the right framework to understand what you actually are. That happens to a lot of people in this place. Neville looked at him with something complex in his expression, gratitude and wariness and the particular vulnerability of someone who is not used to being seen accurately. How do you know all this? He asked. You're 11. I am, Harry agreed. But my blood is considerably older. After dinner Harry went to Dumbledore's office. He had not been nervous about it all day. He checked, periodically, honestly, and found the same thing each time, not calm exactly, more like clarity. Uncluttered. He knew what this conversation was, and he knew what it was for, and he walked up the spiral staircase behind the gargoyle and knocked on the door with the same energy he'd used to walk out of the Dursleys' house on his birthday. Direct. Decided. Come in, Harry. The office was extraordinary. He let himself notice that, not be overwhelmed by it, but notice it properly, the way things deserve to be noticed. Books and instruments and portraits of sleeping headmasters and the great bird on the perch, the phoenix, Fawkes, who looked at Harry with golden eyes that held more intelligence than most people's and made a single low musical sound in the back of its throat when Harry came in. Harry looked at Fawkes. Hello, he said. Fawkes trilled. Not the usual response to a stranger, by the expression on Dumbledore's face. But it made sense. The phoenix was a creature of deep magic, and deep magic knew its own. Dumbledore was sitting behind his desk, half-moon glasses in place, blue eyes regarding Harry with an expression so warm and so careful it was like watching two things occupy the same face. He was wearing robes the color of a summer sky, and he gestured to the chair across from him with the ease of a man who is genuinely comfortable inviting people into his space. Sit down, Harry. Please. Harry sat. Lemon drop? Dumbledore offered. No thank you. A small smile. I find, Dumbledore said, settling back in his chair, that your letter rather removed the possibility of small talk. That was the intention, Harry said. I didn't want to waste your time. Consider it. The word was genuine, not dry. Dumbledore looked at him over his glasses with those extraordinary eyes, and Harry looked back, and the thing between them was the truth, sitting in the room like a third person, unavoidable. You know what I did? Yes. And you know why I did it? Not a question. Not quite. I have a theory, Harry said. You believe that a child who came into his full power too early, without being properly shaped by experience and guidance, would become either a casualty or a threat. You believed the safest path for me and for the wizarding world was a controlled development. Measured. Supervised. He paused. You. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Fawkes made another low sound. You have thought about this carefully, he said. I had a month. And you are, Dumbledore tilted his head slightly, not shouting at me. Shouting seemed less useful than understanding, Harry said. I do understand, by the way. I'm not saying you were stupid or cruel. You were intelligent and convinced. The problem isn't your intelligence, Professor. It's that you made a decision for me, about me, without asking me, based entirely on your assessment of the risk. He met those blue eyes directly. And you continued making decisions for me for 10 years while I lived in a cupboard under the stairs. A long silence. Dumbledore's expression didn't collapse or deflect. He held it, the full weight of it, which Harry respected, actually. A lesser man would have argued or explained. Dumbledore absorbed it. The Dursleys, Dumbledore said, and his voice was different now. Quieter. I am aware that your home situation was, not a home, Harry said. Let's be accurate. Was very far from what I hoped when I placed you there. He removed his glasses and held them in both hands, looking at them. I was wrong about the Dursleys. That is, he paused, perhaps the thing I will carry longest. I'm not here to make you carry things, Harry said. I'm here because we're going to have to deal with each other honestly, and I thought it was better to establish that now than to spend months playing out a version of a relationship where you think I'm the boy you planned for. He folded his hands in his lap. I'm not that. No, Dumbledore agreed. He put his glasses back on. No, you're decidedly not. Something in his expression shifted, the warmth was still there, but the calculation behind it changed quality. The headmaster was recalibrating, and Harry watched the process with genuine interest. This was a brilliant man. A genuinely extraordinary mind. And he was, right now, actually looking at Harry rather than at the plan. May I ask you something? Yes. The Emery's heir claim. The Gringotts documentation. The ministry filing. He said it without accusation, with something more like professional appreciation. All of this, accomplished before you boarded the Hogwarts Express, at 11 years old, after a single day in possession of the knowledge. A pause. What are you planning to do? Not a coup, Harry said. Not a war. I'm planning to be what I actually am, legally and fully, and to make sure no one can rebuild the structures that prevented that. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Including the structures in this castle's foundations. The silence was different now. Sharper. You felt those, Dumbledore said. On my first night. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The portraits on the walls had stopped pretending to be asleep, Harry could see them in his peripheral vision, turned toward the conversation with poorly concealed attention. Those structures exist, Dumbledore said carefully, because in my experience, students who discover the full extent of their unusual heritage too early, without support and guidance, can be destabilized. Can be targeted. Can be used, Harry said. By the right person, with the right approach. A pause. Yes. Like Voldemort. The room reacted to the name the way rooms always did, not Dumbledore, but the portraits and the instruments, a slight ambient flinch. Yes, Dumbledore said again. The situation with Tom is, more complicated than most people know. There are things you will need to understand, in time, that, Professor, Harry said. He said it without edge, without dismissal. I'm not refusing your guidance. I'm refusing your control. Those are different things. I'll listen to everything you know about Voldemort. I'll take every piece of experience and knowledge you're willing to offer. What I won't do is pretend to be smaller than I am so that the process feels more comfortable to manage. He let that settle for a second. The suppressions in the foundations, I want them removed by the end of term. Voluntarily, by you, through proper channels. Otherwise I'll raise it through the Emery's claim at the Wizengamot, and that conversation will be considerably less pleasant for both of us than this one. Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked at him, for a long time, in the particular way of someone who is putting aside who they expected and attempting to actually see who is there. You know, he said finally, and his voice held something that was, improbably, warmth, real warmth, not the managed kind, your mother looked at me exactly like that once. Exactly that expression. Same eyes, different color, same, absolute refusal to let anyone define her perimeter for her. Harry felt something move in his chest. He let it. Was she right? He asked. When she did it? Invariably, Dumbledore said. Then I probably am too. A beat. Then Dumbledore did something Harry hadn't expected, he laughed. Short, genuine, with the rueful quality of someone who finds themselves outmaneuvered and is capable of appreciating the craft of it. I will consider the matter of the foundations, he said. And I will tell you this, I have always intended to tell you the truth. The question was timing. My timing is now, Harry said. So I see. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. I would like to continue these conversations. Regularly. Not as headmaster and student, or not only that. As, he seemed to search for the word. Honest people, Harry offered. Yes, Dumbledore said. Exactly that. Harry stood. Thursday evening's work, he said. Same time. Thursday evenings, Dumbledore agreed. Harry went to the door. Fawkes trilled again as he reached it, that same low, resonant sound, and Harry paused and looked at the phoenix, and Fawkes looked back at him with those golden eyes, and something passed between them that Harry couldn't have put in words but felt in his chest like the harmony of something long separated finally finding its note again. He went back to the dormitory in the rain. The days that followed had a rhythm to them, and Harry found he liked rhythms. Classes in the morning, afternoons with Hermione in the library working through the Atlantean text and the Merlinian inheritance documents that Ironclaw had forwarded by Ministry Owl, evenings with Ron in the common room, which was warm and loud in the comfortable way of a house that is genuinely full. He was carving out a space for himself in Hogwarts that had nothing to do with being the boy who lived. The other students were figuring out what to do with him, the famous name clearly attached to someone who didn't use it as currency, who was quietly extraordinary without performing extraordinariness, who sat in the back of charms and did things with a wand that their professor's expression suggested were several years early and then went back to his notes without marking the moment. The Slytherins were a different calibration. Malfoy had made his approach in the second week, the same approach he'd attempted before Harry had boarded the train, apparently, though Harry hadn't been there for that version. He stopped Harry in the corridor outside the library with the studied casualness of someone who has practiced this. "Potter," he said. "I've been hearing things." "People tend to," Harry said. Malfoy blinked. He had prepared for several responses, this apparently wasn't one of them. "About an inheritance claim," he said. "The Emery's heir." He said the title with a combination of contempt and hunger that told Harry everything about how the Malfoy household discussed power. "My father says it's almost certainly a fraud. Ancient claims get filed all the time. Your father can verify it through the Wisengamot," Harry said pleasantly. "The hearing is next month. He's welcome to attend." "He will," Malfoy said, as though this were a threat. "Good," Harry said. "I'd like him to see it." He started walking again. Malfoy stepped slightly aside, not deliberately, just the automatic response of someone whose body has registered something his social calculations haven't caught up to yet. "Draco," Harry said, not stopping. "The things your father has taught you about blood and power and who deserves what, some of them are right, actually. Power does matter. Lineage does carry things. The part he got wrong is who has it and what it's for." He walked away. Behind him, Malfoy was silent in the way of someone rapidly reassessing. The end of the third week brought the first flying lesson and the incident that Harry suspected would become part of Hogwarts legend through no particular effort of his own. Madam Hooch had them all standing beside broomsticks on the damp pitch, and the lesson proceeded the way it was going to proceed. Harry held out his hand and set up and the broom was in his palm before the word finished, which earned him a sharp look from Hooch and an audible intake of breath from most of the class. He didn't do anything dramatic with it. He listened to Hooch's instructions, rose to the directed height, and stayed there while the rest of the class sorted themselves out with varying degrees of success. It was Neville who created the situation. A combination of poorly mounted broom and the particular bad luck that seemed to orbit him in any context outside a greenhouse, his broom lurched upward before Hooch could stop it, carrying him 20, 30, 40 feet in the air, and then the broom began to buck, and Harry was already moving before Neville started to slide. He didn't think about it. This was the thing he was beginning to understand about Atlantean magic at its core, it didn't wait for analysis. It responded. He went up on his broom as naturally as thought, crossed the 40 feet of air between them in a way that Hooch would later describe in the staff room as simply impossible in terms of timing, and caught Neville's arm with one hand and the broom with the other as Neville came off it. The broom tried to keep going. Harry held it still with his other hand, the way you hold still a frightened animal, just pressure and steadiness, until it calmed. He brought Neville down to the ground. Neville was shaking. Not crying, just shaking, the whole body vibration of someone whose fear has had to find a different expression because they're too dignified to cry in front of their entire class. Harry kept hold of his arm until his feet touched the grass. "You're fine," Harry said. "You've got it." "I haven't got it," Neville said, breathless. "I never have it." "You have 37 other things that you do better than anyone in this year," Harry said. "It doesn't all have to be flight." Neville looked at him. Something in his expression shifted, not bright relief, not sudden confidence, just a small settling, like a stone finding the bottom. 37 seems like a lot. "I've been counting," Harry said. Madame Hooch landed beside them with an expression caught between fury at the breach of instructions and the specific helplessness of someone who has just watched something they cannot professionally acknowledge was spectacular. "Potter," she said. "I know," Harry said. "I was going to give you detention." "I know." She looked at him. At Neville, still slightly pale beside him. At the rest of the class standing in a semicircle on the ground staring upward with their mouths open. She made a sound that was not quite a sigh. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said. "Don't do it again." "Right," Harry said. They both knew he'd do it again in exactly the same circumstances, and they both knew she'd respond exactly the same way. Across the pitch, Malfoy said something to Crabbe and Goyle. Harry caught the word show-off on the air. He thought, not quite, and went back to his broom. That evening the common room was full of the flying lesson story in the way that good stories fill rooms, growing slightly with each retelling, and Harry sat in an armchair by the fire and read the second chapter of the Merlinian inheritance documents and let the story have its life without him in it. Hermione sat opposite him, working through the phonetic framework of the Atlantean script with the focused intensity of someone solving a puzzle that has personal significance. She'd gotten to the point where she could read simple passages, which had taken her less than 2 weeks and which Harry found genuinely impressive. "The velocity meaning correlation," she said, without looking up from the text. "Does it hold in the written form as well as the spoken?" "In the written form the movement of the script carries it. See how those letters are vibrating slightly faster than the ones around them." She looked. "Warning," she said. "Right. First line of the 3rd section. The whole chapter is framed as a caution." "Against what?" Harry looked at the passage. "Against the assumption that because you can read old power, you understand it. The Atlantean scholars were very specific about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. They spent a lot of time on it, actually. I think it was one of the things that," he paused, "that went wrong with them in the end." "You think Atlantis fell because of that? The gap between knowledge and wisdom?" "I think they understood the mechanics of magic better than anyone who has come after them. And I think they used that understanding to try to do something they weren't ready for." He turned a page. "The texts don't say what it was. But there's a chapter near the end of this book that's written in that very fast vibration. The whole chapter. Everything in it is a warning." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Have you read it?" "Yes. And I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks, Harry said honestly. "Some knowledge you sit with for a while before you act on it." She regarded him with that direct Hermione assessment. "You know what's strange about you," she said. "Many things, probably. You're not reckless. Everyone expects, I mean, the Gryffindor reputation, and the flying today, and just everything about how you, but you're not. You're actually very deliberate." She tilted her head. "It's like watching someone play a very long game in real time." "I'm 11, Harry said. "Yes," she said, "and so am I, but I think we both know that's not entirely the relevant fact here." He laughed, the real kind, uncomplicated. Hermione smiled, pleased with herself in the way that genuinely funny observations deserve. Ron appeared from the direction of the portrait hole with a chess set under one arm and the expression of someone looking for a victim. "Either of you play?" he asked. "I play," Hermione said immediately, and the competitive light in her eyes suggested that this was going to be interesting for everyone involved. Harry watched them set up the board and felt the warmth of the common room and the fire and the familiar comfortable presence of people who had chosen to be around him without any agenda, and he thought, this is also what it's for. Power, blood, old names, legal claims, Thursday evenings with Dumbledore, none of it mattered more than this. The having of people. Real ones. Ron moved a pawn and grinned at Hermione. Don't feel bad when you lose. Most people do. Hermione looked at the board for 4 seconds. Bishop to d4, she said. Ron's grin faltered. You can't, he looked at the board. How did you? I've been reading about chess, she said serenely. Harry went back to his book, smiling. Outside the tower windows the rain had finally stopped, and the sky had cleared to that deep end of summer clarity that sometimes happens in Scotland in September. All the grey washed away and what was left was something dark and bright at once, full of stars that had been there the whole time. He turned a page of the inheritance documents and found a section he hadn't read yet, a list of the Emrys heirs' specific protections under old law, the ones Merlin himself had written in to ensure that whoever carried the bloodline after him would not be subject to the kind of institutional control that the wizarding world had a habit of exerting over anyone too powerful to ignore. He read through them carefully, each one, and when he reached number 7 he stopped. No heir of the Emrys line shall be subject to any suppression, binding, limitation, or diminishment of their magical heritage enacted without their consent, by any individual, institution, or governing body, regardless of stated intention or claimed authority. Any such suppression, discovered and documented, constitutes an act of aggression against the line itself and may be pursued before the full Wisengamot without limitation of time. Regardless of stated intention, Harry thought. Regardless of claimed authority. Dumbledore had broken the law. A law written by Merlin himself. He had done it with good intentions and brilliant skill and genuine love of a kind, but he had broken it. And Harry had the documentation. He closed the book and set it on the arm of the chair and looked at the fire. Not angry. Just clear. Just thinking about how you use a thing like this, and when, and to what end. Not for revenge, he had no interest in revenge. For change. For the wholesale architectural dismantling of a system built to keep people smaller than they were. Including the suppressions in the castle's foundations. Including whatever Dumbledore had been building toward with his 10-year plan. Including, in due course, whatever Voldemort was doing in the back of Quirrell's head. One thing at a time. Harry, Ron said, from the chess table, with the voice of someone who has just suffered an unexpected loss, she took my queen. I saw, Harry said. Is she always like this? Harry looked at Hermione, who was arranging her captured pieces with the satisfied precision of someone in their correct element. Yes, he said. It's one of her best qualities. Hermione looked up and caught his eye, and there was something in that look, a kind of recognition, two people who see things clearly and have found others who see clearly too, which is rarer and more important than most people know until they have it. Outside, the stars burned cold and steady over the Scottish Highlands, and Hogwarts settled into its old stones like a sleeping animal, full of students who were more than they knew, carrying bloodlines and potential and old magic that had been waiting patient as stone for someone to come along and start asking the right questions. The fire cracked and settled. Harry turned the page. Chapter 4, What the Deep Places Remember. The Halloween feast was Hermione's idea, in the sense that she was the one who noticed the date and suggested they actually enjoy it rather than spend the evening in the library. Harry had agreed, Ron had been enthusiastic about it since approximately the 2nd of October, and even Neville had allowed himself to be talked into something resembling anticipation, which for Neville was a significant concession to celebration. The Great Hall had been transformed. Thousands of candles floated at varying heights, and carved pumpkins lined the walls breathing orange light into the spaces between the candle glow, and the ceiling showed a sky thick with moving clouds and the occasional suggestion of something flying through them that probably wasn't a bat but possibly was. The tables were loaded with food that Hogwarts produced on feast nights with the generosity of a place that understood the specific human need for excess on ceremonial occasions. Harry was eating roast chicken and listening to Fred and George Weasley explain a scheme involving a dung bomb and Professor Filch's filing cabinet when the doors of the Great Hall slammed open. Professor Quirrell came through them at a run. Not his usual tentative shuffle. An actual run, robes flying, turban slightly askew, with the expression of a man who is either genuinely terrified or performing genuine terror with extraordinary commitment. He made it 3 steps into the hall before he grabbed the nearest table for support and shouted, in a voice that cracked on the high notes, "Troll! In the dungeons! Thought you ought to know." Then he fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore was on his feet immediately, wand raised, voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Prefects, lead your houses to the dormitories immediately." His eyes swept the room with the controlled urgency of a general who has had to manage crises before and knows the first 30 seconds are the ones that matter. Harry was already standing. He had felt the troll before Quirrell announced it, not the creature specifically, but the disturbance it caused, a blunt heaviness moving through the lower floors like a boulder rolling through a stream bed, disrupting the castle's ambient resonance in a way that was distinct and specific. He'd clocked it approximately 4 minutes ago and had been trying to locate it more precisely when Quirrell came through the doors. He also knew where Hermione was. She'd mentioned, on their way into the feast, that she'd left her copy of magical hieroglyphics and logograms in the first-floor girls' bathroom and was going to retrieve it after eating. She hadn't come in until after the feast began. He looked at Ron. Ron was already looking at him, the same thought clearly having arrived by a slightly different route. Hermione. She doesn't know, Ron said. They moved. McGonagall's voice followed them from behind. Potter, Weasley, the prefects will, but they were already through the door and McGonagall, Harry suspected, knew when a door was closed. The corridors were emptying fast, students streaming toward their common rooms, and Harry and Ron went against the current, which earned them a few startled looks and one very pointed shout from Percy Weasley that neither of them acknowledged. The troll was below them, Harry could feel it, the dungeons, which meant Quirrell's feint had been performance, which meant this was deliberate, which meant there was something in the dungeons Quirrell or his passenger wanted undisturbed while the school was in chaos. But first, the bathroom. They found it in time that Harry later thought had no business being as close as it was. The troll was already in the corridor outside, which was a 12-foot problem made of grey skin and malice and a club the size of a small tree, and Harry registered all of this in about a quarter of a second and then registered that the door to the bathroom was closed and that Hermione's voice was coming from behind it, high and very controlled, saying, "Oh no. Oh no, oh no." The troll swung toward the door. Harry moved. He didn't use a wand. There wasn't time for it, and honestly there wasn't need. He stepped between the troll and the bathroom door and put his hand flat against the stone floor of the corridor and said, in Atlantean, one word. Stop. Not a spell. Not a charm. Not a transfiguration. Something more fundamental, a command issued not to the troll but to the water in the stone itself, the deep aquifer running under Hogwarts, responding to its heir's voice the way old things respond to old names. The floor trembled once, briefly, and a crack ran from Harry's hand to the troll's feet and ice formed in that crack, not a lot of it, just enough, spreading up the troll's ankles and calves like stone setting around stone. The troll stopped. It looked down. It looked at Harry. Its tiny eyes held the particular confusion of something that has never been told no by anything smaller than itself. Then it roared and swung the club. Harry ducked under it, clean, close, the air from the swing moving his hair, and came up on the other side and this time he had his wand out and said, Wingardium Leviosa, with the casual certainty of someone who has this spell so completely integrated that it is less a spell than a suggestion, and the club came out of the troll's grip and hung in the air 10 feet up, and then at Harry's direction it dropped. Handle down. Directly onto the troll's head. The sound it made was extraordinary. The troll sat down with an expression of deep personal betrayal and then toppled sideways and lay still, snoring with the profundity of something that has had a very surprising evening. The bathroom door opened. Hermione stood in the frame, white-faced, clutching her book to her chest. She looked at the troll. At Harry. At Ron, who had come up behind Harry and was now staring at the unconscious troll with his wand still raised and an expression of amazed anticlimax. She looked at the ice on the troll's feet, which was still there and was now slowly spreading up to its knees. "Are you all right?" Harry asked her. "Yes," she said. "Then, you said something. Before the wand. What did you say?" "Atlantean for stop." "And the floor listened." "The water under the floor listened," Harry said. "The floor was an intermediary." Hermione looked at the crack in the stone, at the ice, at the troll. Something moved across her face, not just relief, not just the adrenaline aftershock, something more considered. "The troll being here," she said. "That's not random, is it?" "No," Harry said. "Someone let it in. Someone needed the school distracted." "Quirrell," she said. "Quirrell," Harry confirmed. "For what?" "I'm working on that," Harry said. "But it's in the dungeons." The sound of footsteps on stone announced the arrival of 3 professors, McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell himself, and Harry watched all 3 of them as they came around the corner and stopped at the sight of the troll. McGonagall went white and then deeply pink in rapid succession. Snape looked at Harry with an expression that would have passed for neutral to anyone who didn't catch the thing underneath it, the thing that wasn't contempt or satisfaction or any of the expected Snape emotions. It was something much more alarmed. And Quirrell looked at Harry with the stammer and the wide eyes perfectly in place, but underneath that, underneath the performance, the cold second presence that lived in the back of his head was looking at Harry Potter for the first time with something it hadn't had before. "Attention. Explain yourselves," McGonagall said, her voice entirely steady, which Harry recognized by now as the vocal equivalent of controlled breathing during a crisis. "We were coming to warn Hermione," Ron said. "She didn't know about the troll. She was in the bathroom." McGonagall looked at Hermione. Hermione, to her considerable credit, said, "They saved my life, Professor. The troll was at the door when they arrived." A beat. McGonagall surveyed the scene, troll unconscious, ice on its feet, the club on the floor, 3 first-year students standing in the corridor where they absolutely should not be, and yet somehow the right outcome had occurred anyway. She made the expression of a woman who is maintaining her position on several contradictory feelings simultaneously. 5 points each to Gryffindor, she said. For sheer nerve. She paused. And 5 points from each of you for being out of bounds. Don't look at me like that, Potter, there are rules for reasons. Understood, Harry said. Snape made a small sound that might, in a different man, have been a laugh. He covered it by examining the ice on the troll's feet with professional interest. Unusual restraint technique, he said, in the tone of someone making a clinical observation. Ice through the stone substrate rather than a direct freezing charm. More efficient, Harry said. Less energy expenditure. Snape looked at him. Where did you study that application? Intuition, Harry said, which was true and also not remotely the full picture. Snape's expression suggested he knew both those things. He filed them away behind his eyes and said nothing else. Quirrell, standing slightly apart from the group, was not looking at the troll. He was looking at Harry, and Harry let him look, and looked back, and the cold presence behind Quirrell's eyes tasted the air of the corridor the way a snake tastes air and found something in it that made it very, very still. November arrived and brought with it the first Quidditch match and the announcement that Harry was on the Gryffindor team, which Wood, the captain, a 7th year with the strategic intensity of a small general, had engineered with bureaucratic thoroughness and only slightly excessive enthusiasm. Harry had agreed to play for one reason: the game itself was genuinely wonderful. He was on his Nimbus 2000 at 200 feet in sharp November air, and the pitch spread out below him and the crowd was a wall of noise, and he felt something he recognized from the Atlantean texts, the specific joy of moving through a medium that responds to you, of being in conversation with velocity and gravity and the particular physics of flight. He caught the snitch in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Not because he was showing off. The snitch went where it went and he went where it went, and the crowd's roar when his hand closed around it was enormous, and he held it up so we could see it from across the pitch and then landed cleanly and let the celebration happen around him like weather passing through. Ron was purple with joy. Hermione hugged him before she'd apparently decided to do it, then looked slightly startled at herself. Neville shook his hand twice with both of his. In the stands, Harry caught a glimpse of Dumbledore in his staff seat, watching not the pitch but Harry himself with the patient attention of a man reassessing the length of a very long game. And beside Dumbledore, Quirrell, who was very still in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The Thursday evenings with Dumbledore had become something Harry genuinely valued, which he suspected was not entirely an accident of Dumbledore's design but was also not something he was going to dismiss on those grounds. Dumbledore was extraordinary company when he chose to be honest, which he was choosing to be more frequently as the weeks went on. Harry thought this had less to do with trust developing and more to do with the simple fact that Dumbledore found the honest conversation more interesting than the managed one. They had talked about Voldemort, the shape of him, the history, the connection to Harry that Dumbledore had known about since before Harry could walk. They talked about it the way you talk about a storm you can see on the horizon, with respect for the scale of it and without panic about the timeline. "He's here," Harry said, on the fourth Thursday of November. In the building. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You can feel him." The double resonance in Quirrell. "It's been there since the first day, and it's been getting stronger." He watched Dumbledore's face. "You knew." "I suspected," Dumbledore said. "There are things in this school that Tom would want very much. I have been monitoring the situation." "The Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. Dumbledore's expression did something very controlled. "You know about that. The vault from Gringotts was moved in July. Ironclaw mentioned it. And the third-floor corridor. And Fluffy." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'm not going to stumble into it. I'm not going to go looking for it. But I need you to understand that I know it's here and I know Quirrell is after it, and if the situation changes I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "You are the most difficult person I have ever attempted to protect." "I'm the most difficult person you've ever attempted to protect because you attempted to protect me," Harry said. "If you'd just told me things, you'd find me quite reasonable." A pause. Then that rueful laugh again, the one Harry had started to look forward to, the laugh of a man who is genuinely losing gracefully. "Your mother said something almost identical to me," Dumbledore said. "In her 6th year. Word for word, essentially." "She sounds like she was right," Harry said. "She was almost always right," Dumbledore said. "It was her most distinctive quality. The thing that happened in the first week of December started small, the way most significant things start." Harry was in Charms, 3rd period, working on a relatively advanced memory charm that Flitwick had introduced somewhat optimistically to the first years on the grounds that the theoretical framework was accessible even if the execution would vary. The class had been working for about 20 minutes and Harry had the charm running at about 70% of the intended effect, which was solid, and was beginning to probe the mechanism of why the remaining 30% wasn't integrating when Neville made a small sound at the bench next to him. Not a pain sound. Not a surprise sound. Something lower and stranger, barely audible, more like a frequency than a sound. Harry's head came up immediately. Neville was sitting absolutely still, his wand on the bench in front of him, both hands flat on the table. His eyes were open but not focused on anything in the room. The charm he'd been attempting was gone from his workspace, no suspended objects, no residual magic. What was there instead was something Harry felt in his sternum before he understood it, a resonance, deep and structural, the old-rooted quality he'd identified in Neville's blood on the train but different now, different in magnitude, active rather than latent. The bench under Neville's hands had cracked. 2 clean lines, running from his palms outward. "Neville," Harry said. "Nothing." "Neville." He reached over and put one hand on Neville's shoulder and felt it immediately, the current moving through him, not wild, not uncontrolled, but immense, the way a river is immense, the way something that has been held back for a long time is immense when it finally moves. Neville wasn't in distress. He was somewhere Harry recognized from his own month of sitting quietly in the leaky cauldron, somewhere interior and vast. The problem was that the classroom did not know what to do with it. The charm apparatus on 3 nearby benches had begun to resonate in sympathy, objects vibrating at frequencies they weren't designed for, a pitch that was climbing toward the threshold that glass doesn't like and ears don't like and old stone that has been perfectly still for centuries doesn't like. Flitwick had noticed. He was moving toward them with quick, short steps, his expression caught between alarm and the professional competence of someone who has taught long enough to have seen unusual things. "Mr. Longbottom, I've got it, Professor," Harry said, calmly, and he did what the Atlantean texts described for exactly this situation, a situation of power activation, untrained, spontaneous, which was not to stop it or redirect it but to witness it. To be a tuned presence that the activating magic could orient to. He put his other hand on the bench. He breathed. He felt his own deep water core and let it sit in the room without agenda, without pulling at Neville's power or guiding it, just present, just stable, just an anchor point. The vibrating object steadied. The pitch dropped. Neville blinked and came back into the room with the startled look of someone surfacing. He looked at his hands. At the cracked bench. At Harry beside him. "What happened?" he said. "Something woke up," Harry said quietly. "We'll talk about it properly later. Are you all right?" Neville took inventory of himself with the careful thoroughness of someone checking for damage. "I think so. I feel," he paused. "I feel like I've been carrying something heavy for a very long time and someone took it." "That sounds about right." Flitwick had reached them and was looking at the cracked bench and at Neville and at Harry and at the calmed vibration in the room with the expression of a man for whom the day has become considerably more interesting than he planned. "Mr. Longbottom," he said gently. "How are you feeling?" "All right, sir," Neville said, and he sounded it. More than all right, actually. He sounded like himself, which Harry suspected was possibly the first time he'd sounded fully like himself in quite a while. "I think," Flitwick said, glancing at the bench, "we may need to discuss your magical development in more detail than the standard curriculum addresses." He was trying to keep his voice professionally measured and not entirely succeeding. He turned to Harry. "The resonance anchoring you used. That is not on any first-year curriculum I have ever written." "No sir," Harry said. "I'll explain the framework if it would be useful." Flitwick opened his mouth. Closed it. "My office," he said, "Wednesday afternoon. Both of you." He looked at the cracked bench one more time. "I'll get the reparo. Carry on." He went to find his wand. Hermione, from the bench on Harry's other side, leaned toward him. "What exactly just happened?" "Neville's old-rooted blood woke up," Harry said. "Because of the memory charm?" "Memory charms work on the part of the mind that holds identity. His magic took it personally." He watched Neville, who was looking at his hands with an expression Harry recognized completely, the expression of someone taking their first clear look at something that was always there. It happens sometimes when the integrated magic is strong enough. The charm reaches for something and finds considerably more than it expected. "Is he going to be all right?" "Better than all right," Harry said. "It's going to take time to understand, but," he glanced at Neville, who had picked up his wand and was holding it differently than he'd held it before, with the grip of someone who has found the right way to hold a thing after years of holding it wrong. "He's going to be very good." "Good as in?" "Good as in the kind of good that should probably worry Voldemort, yes." Hermione sat with that for a moment. Then she straightened, picked up her own wand, and said, "We should all practice more." "We really should," Harry agreed. The Flitwick meeting on Wednesday was one of the better afternoons Harry spent at Hogwarts in his first year. The tiny professor's office was stacked floor to ceiling with charm theory texts and research papers and the kind of organized chaos that indicates genuine intellectual life, and Flitwick himself, divested of the performance of teaching and sitting across from two students he'd clearly already assessed as operating well outside the standard framework, was a completely different kind of fascinating. He asked questions the way good academics ask questions, as though the answer mattered to him personally, as though the conversation was something he was in rather than conducting. He'd already pulled 3 texts on Atlantean charm theory from his shelves, which told Harry he'd been doing his own research since the first class of term. The integration principle, Flitwick said, which you described in your first lesson, I've read about it. Theoretical framework only, always theoretical, because no one in the modern era has the access to the primary sources that would allow practical application. The translation debates alone have consumed 3 generations of unspeakable researchers. He looked at Harry. You are working from the primary text. Yes, sir. In the original. Yes, sir. Flitwick sat with his hands folded, very still, in the way of someone taking a moment to properly appreciate a remarkable thing. Mr. Potter, he said. I want to be very careful about how I say this. I am your teacher and your primary duty here is your education. The standard curriculum exists for very good reasons. He paused. And it is also clearly insufficient for you, and quite possibly for Mr. Longbottom, and I believe I would be doing you both a disservice if I pretended otherwise. What are you offering, sir? Harry asked. Independent study authorization. I can grant it for charms, and I believe I can persuade Professor McGonagall to extend it to transfiguration given what I've seen in her class. The curriculum covers the approved framework. Your independent study, he looked at them both, would be your own business, provided you continue to meet the standard assessment requirements. That seems more than fair, Harry said. Neville was looking at Flitwick with an expression of surprised gratitude that he was trying to keep from being too obvious, not quite succeeding. Sir, he said. What happened in class, the bench, Flitwick said, has been replaced. And the incident has been logged as an accidental magic discharge, which is entirely normal for first years. He looked at Neville with a kindness that was very specific. What is less normal, Mr. Longbottom, is the particular quality of what discharged. I want you to know that I have been teaching for 42 years and I recognize depth of magical heritage when I encounter it. Your family's line carries something old. He folded his hands again. Something that deserves to be understood properly, not left to accidental activation. Neville's throat moved. He looked down at the desk for a moment, and when he looked back up his expression was something Harry hadn't seen from him before, not just gratitude, not just relief, but something harder and more lasting. The look of someone who has been given accurate information about themselves after a long time without it and is deciding what to do with the new weight of it. Thank you, sir, Neville said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Flitwick said briskly, which was so perfectly Flitwick that Harry felt warm toward him immediately. The reading list I'm going to give you is not short. That evening in the common room the fire was the loudest thing for a while, everyone else at dinner or the library or occupied elsewhere, and Harry sat with Neville, just the two of them, and told him properly what he'd told him in pieces, about old-rooted blood, about the Atlantean concept of Daiwath, about the long water his grandmother had mentioned and what it actually meant, about the kinds of magic that moved through the deep lineages differently than standard wand work. Neville listened the way Neville listened, completely, with his whole attention, not interrupting, not rushing toward a response but sitting with each piece of information until it settled. Harry had come to trust this quality in him more than almost any other. The world was full of people who heard things and immediately had to respond. Neville let things mean what they meant before he said anything about them. My parents, Neville said, after a while. Do you think they knew about the long water quality? Probably some version of it. Your grandmother knows more than she said, I think. The word she used, it's not a common word. Someone taught it to her with intention. She doesn't talk about them much. My parents. He turned his wand over in his hands, the new grip, the right grip. Everyone tells me they were brave. Which is the thing people say when they don't want to say the thing they're actually thinking. The thing they're actually thinking, Harry said carefully, is that it was terrible and unfair and they don't know how to hold that beside the fact that you're here and you need to be able to get through dinner without it crushing you. Neville looked at him. Yeah, he said. That's it. A pause. You're good at knowing what things actually are. It's the blood memory, Harry said. Atlantean magic is fundamentally about accurate perception. Seeing the actual shape of things rather than the expected shape. Is that why Quirrell makes your eyes go like that? Harry's attention sharpened. What do you mean, like that? When you look at him, Neville said, with the observation of someone who pays very close attention to the people around them, your eyes change. Not physically. But the quality of your attention changes. Like you're reading something. I can feel what's in him, Harry said honestly. And it's not just Quirrell. Neville was quiet for a moment. Voldemort, he said. He said it without flinching, which was its own kind of statement. His parents had been tortured to madness by Voldemort's most devoted followers. He had every right to flinch. He chose not to. Yes, Harry said. What are you going to do about it? Wait, Harry said. Watch. Understand the full shape of it before I move. He paused. He's not here for me this year. He doesn't know yet what I am. He thinks he's still dealing with what Dumbledore prepared, a moderately gifted orphan with a scar and a legend to live up to. When he finds out, Neville said, what will he do? Recalculate, Harry said. He's intelligent. He'll recalculate. And then we'll see. Neville said. Not a question. You're old-rooted, Harry said. Your magic woke up this week. The bench is cracked and the question is open. So yes, Neville looked at the fire for a long moment. Then something settled in him, a decision made and made cleanly, visible in the line of his shoulders and the set of his jaw. Right then, he said. I'll start that reading list. The portrait hole swung open and Ron and Hermione came in from dinner, mid-argument about something that turned out to be the optimal study schedule for end-of-term assessments, and the common room filled up again with the warmth and noise of people doing the ordinary business of being alive together. Harry listened to them argue and felt the fire and felt the castle and felt somewhere in the deep bedrock beneath it the quiet old structures that had been built to keep people small, still there, but less permanent than they'd been in September. Because Neville's bench had cracked. And Harry Potter was paying very close attention to Quirrell's double resonance. And the Emery's air claim was moving through the Wizengamot at the precise pace of a river wearing down stone. And Dumbledore, in his office 3 floors above, was sitting with the knowledge that the careful architecture of 10 years had met a single boy who looked at it with clear eyes and simply began to take it apart. Not with rage. Not with performance. With patience and deep water and the long memory of old blood that knew exactly what it was and had decided that knowing was enough. Outside, the first snow of winter came down over the Hogwarts grounds, slow and steady, covering everything. Underneath it, the deep places remembered. Chapter 5, The Headmaster's Architecture. The ministry hearing was scheduled for the 15th of December, the last week of term, and the letter confirming it arrived at breakfast on a Monday morning with the particular bureaucratic weight of something that has been processed through several departments and is now inevitable. Harry read it over his toast. The hearing was before the Ancient Heritage Office and a panel of 5 Wizengamot members. Ironclaw's solicitor, a goblin named Sharp Fong who communicated exclusively in precise, devastating legal language and whom Harry had come to appreciate enormously, had filed the supporting documentation 6 weeks ago. The Emery's claim verification, the blood ritual results, the Gringotts' authentication of both the Atlantean lineage and the Merlinian succession. Everything in order. Everything documented. And attached, on a separate sheet, a secondary notice. The Board of Governors of Hogwarts had formally requested to be present at the hearing. The reason given was that the Emery's heir claim, if verified, had direct implications for the school charter. The reason not given, which Harry read clearly between the lines of the formal language, was that Lucius Malfoy sat on the Board of Governors and had been informed by his son that Harry Potter was not what everyone expected. The board, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder in the way she did when something interested her more than personal space protocol. That's significant. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. Is he going to try to contest the claim? He's going to try to understand it first, Harry said. He's intelligent. He'll want the full picture before he decides which way to move. Ron looked up from his porridge. My dad says Malfoy Sr. is the most dangerous man on the board. Not because he's powerful, he is, obviously, but because he's patient. Patient people are useful, Harry said. They listen before they act. That sounds like a good thing. It can be. Depends entirely on what they're patient in service of. Ron considered this. My dad also says he was a Death Eater who claimed he was under the Imperius curse. Which might even be partly true, Harry said. The interesting thing about Lucius Malfoy is that his actual position is probably more complicated than either his supporters or his critics want it to be. He believes in blood heritage and old power and the primacy of old families. Those beliefs don't require Voldemort to survive. They just require the right framework to operate within. Hermione was looking at him with the particular expression she used when she was slightly ahead of where she'd expected the conversation to go. You're thinking about how to make him useful. I'm thinking about how to make the hearing useful, Harry said. Which is a different thing, but related. The week before the hearing was also the week that Snape stopped pretending he wasn't watching Harry. He had been watching since the first potions lesson. Harry had known that, had accepted it as one of the ambient conditions of being himself in this building, but until now it had been a peripheral attention, the kind that an experienced observer applies to a situation they're monitoring without yet being ready to engage directly. The week before the hearing it became something more deliberate. It happened in potions on Tuesday. They were brewing a basic antidote, third-year level by the curriculum standards but straightforward enough once you understood the integrative logic of counter potions, and Harry was halfway through and precisely on time when Snape stopped beside his bench and stayed there. Not moving. Not offering criticism or correction. Just standing, looking at the cauldron with an expression of concentrated assessment. Harry kept working. He added the bezoar dust with a steady hand and watched the color shift the way it was supposed to shift, clean and complete. Where did you get that technique? Snape said. Which technique, sir? The sequence inversion. Standard antidote protocol adds the neutralizing agent last. You added it second and built the base around it. The base is more stable that way, Harry said. The neutralizing agent sets the structural intention of the potion and the other ingredients respond to it rather than being overridden by it. He glanced up at Snape. It's an Atlantean approach to compound integration. The same principle applies in potions as in charm theory. If you establish the core intention first, the surrounding elements orient to it naturally rather than requiring precise management. A silence. Snape was looking at him with that flat, measuring gaze and Harry looked back with the same directness he always brought to it. That is, Snape said, carefully, a technically valid approach. It is also not in any curriculum currently taught in any wizarding school in Britain. He paused. Or anywhere else, to my knowledge. It's in the Atlantean texts, Harry said. Chapter 9, if you want the specific framework. Though the original is in the water script, I can translate the relevant passage. Another silence, longer. The kind that has a lot happening in it. You speak Atlantean, Snape said. Not a question. Not quite a statement. I read it. The spoken form is, Harry paused, remembering the troll in the corridor, the word he'd said, the floor that had listened. In progress. Snape looked at the cauldron, which was a perfect shade of gold and absolutely without impurities, and back at Harry, and something shifted in his expression in a way that was very small and very significant. The contempt that Snape wore like a professional uniform was still there, technically, but it had developed a crack. Not warmth, Snape and warmth appeared to have an agreement to respect each other's boundaries, but something adjacent to professional acknowledgement, which in Snape's economy of expression was practically affectionate. The technique is acceptable, he said. The antidote will be noted as alternative method, not deviation. Thank you, sir. Snape moved on. Hermione, at the next bench, caught Harry's eye and mouthed, "That was enormous." Harry shrugged fractionally. She pressed her lips together again over that suppressed smile. Wednesday evening, 2 days before the hearing, Harry arrived at Dumbledore's office and found someone already there. Not sitting in the visitor's chair, standing near the window, looking out at the grounds with his hands clasped behind his back, dressed in robes that were expensive in the quiet way that old money is expensive, which is to say they looked simple and cost more than most people's houses. He turned when Harry came in, and Harry had a moment to take him in, tall, blonde, fine-featured, with the particular combination of ease and alertness that marks someone who is always the most powerful person in a room and has been for so long it has become invisible to them. Lucius Malfoy. "Ah," Dumbledore said, from behind his desk, with the equanimity of a man who has arranged a situation and is now prepared to observe it. "Harry, I believe you know who this is." "Lucius, Harry Potter." Malfoy looked at Harry the way he'd looked at the window, assessing, patient, perfectly composed. His eyes went to the scar, then to Harry's face, then to something else entirely, some quality he was reading that Harry suspected most people couldn't see because most people weren't looking for it. He was a man who understood heritage. He could feel what Harry was, even without the ritual results. "Mr. Potter," he said. The voice was exactly what Harry expected, measured, precise, with the particular resonance of someone who has never needed to raise it to be heard. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. He took the chair he usually sat in, the one across from Dumbledore's desk, settled into it comfortably. "I wasn't expecting to see you until Friday. I thought it might be useful to speak informally before the hearing," Malfoy said. He didn't sit. He moved away from the window and toward the desk, positioning himself in the way that people position themselves when they want to seem casual while actually claiming the center of a room. Harry watched him do it with interest. "Dumbledore suggested this meeting?" he asked. "I invited Lucius," Dumbledore said, in the tone of someone who is being honest about the mechanism while remaining artfully quiet about the intention. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back with those half-moon glasses and those honest, complicated eyes. Harry thought, "You're trying to give him a look at me before Friday so he has context." He thought, "Or you're trying to give me a look at him." He thought, possibly both, simultaneously, which is very Dumbledore. "The claim," Malfoy said. "The Emery's heir claim. The board has reviewed the Gringotts documentation." He paused. "It appears to be genuine." "It is genuine," Harry said. "The Atlantean heritage verification is more complex to assess. The last Atlantean blood test on record at the Ministry was conducted in 1743, Harry said. The Blackwater family. 17% Atlantean descent, which was the highest recorded at that time." He met Malfoy's eyes. "I'm at 55. A very controlled pause. "Yes," Malfoy said. "I read the Gringotts numbers." He studied Harry with undisguised, calculating interest. "You understand that a claim of this magnitude, if it alters the school charter, also alters the governance structure. The board's authority under the current charter is significant." "I know what the charter says," Harry said. "I've read it 3 times. The Emery's claim doesn't remove the board's authority. It adds an advisory obligation. The board is required to consult with the Emery's heir on matters of educational policy affecting students with unusual heritage." He paused. "Which is currently most students, since there are suppression structures in the castle's foundations that most people don't know about." Malfoy went very still. "Suppression structures. In the foundations. Built into the school's core warding. Designed to prevent students from fully perceiving the extent of their own magical heritage without guidance." He let the word sit. "They've been there for some time. I became aware of them on my first night." Something happened in Malfoy's expression that was very interesting. The composed surface remained intact, but beneath it something sharpened, the specific sharpness of a man who has just been given information that dramatically reorganizes his existing model of a situation he thought he understood. Harry thought, he didn't know. He thought, or he knew and didn't know what it meant. He thought, either way, this is new data for him and he's processing it against his framework of who holds power and who has decided what. Who built them? Malfoy asked. Harry glanced at Dumbledore. Dumbledore said, quietly, that is a matter I have committed to addressing before the end of this term. Another long, precise silence. Malfoy looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was not hostile, it was the expression of someone updating their map, the exact same expression Harry had seen on Dumbledore's face in their first meeting. Interesting, to see it on Malfoy. Interesting, to see these two men of enormous intelligence and very different values both processing the same fundamental fact, that Harry Potter was not what they'd planned for, and that planning was going to have to give way to response. I'll be at the hearing on Friday, Malfoy said, to both of them, to neither of them. He moved toward the door. At the threshold he stopped, and turned, and looked at Harry for one more moment. My son says you told him the part his father got wrong was who has power and what it's for. He held Harry's gaze. I'm interested in your framework, Mr. Potter. Whatever its source. He left. The door closed. Harry and Dumbledore looked at each other across the desk in the quiet office, Fawkes burning softly on his perch. You knew about the suppression structures in the foundations, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said. No equivocation, no framing. Just yes. You built them. Yes. When? 1963. I had been headmaster for 6 years. He removed his glasses, the gesture Harry had come to recognize as meaning he was going to say something that cost him something. There was an incident. A student, not relevant to name, who came from a lineage not unlike your own. Old blood, deep power, no preparation. The activation was sudden and catastrophic. 3 students were seriously injured. The student in question was, he paused, damaged by it. Permanently. Harry waited. I built the structures to prevent recurrence, Dumbledore said. They were not built to control or diminish. They were built to slow the rate of awareness enough that students could receive guidance before activation. He replaced his glasses. In practice, over 60 years, the effect became something different. The slow became the stop. And I, another pause, the honest kind, the kind that doesn't reach for justification, continued to manage it rather than revisit it. Because revisiting it would have required admitting you'd built something that was causing harm, Harry said. Yes. And the suppressions on my core were part of the same framework. A targeted application of the same principle, Dumbledore said. With different reasoning and, I will say it plainly, different effect. What I did in the castle was paternalistic and wrong in its outcome. What I did to you specifically was, he stopped. I have not found an adequate word for it. Inexcusable covers it, Harry said, without heat. But I'm not saying it to condemn you. I'm saying it because we need accurate language for the thing in order to make sure it doesn't happen again. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time, and what was in his expression now was something Harry hadn't seen there before, not warmth, not calculation, not the careful managed wisdom of the headmaster. Something less guarded. Something that looked, if Harry was reading it right, very much like respect. The structures in the foundations, Harry said. Will you remove them before Friday? I will remove them tonight, Dumbledore said. He was as good as his word. Harry felt it from the dormitory at around 2 in the morning, a shift in the castle's resonance, the deep structural hum changing quality, something that had been creating a subtle interference in the ambient frequency simply stopping. The hum settled into a cleaner register, a lower and more complex chord, and through it Harry could feel the castle's actual magic more clearly than he'd been able to feel it since September, old and vast and layered with generations, absolutely extraordinary. He lay awake and listened to it for a while. In the bed next to him, Neville stirred. Harry could tell he was awake too, by his breathing. They didn't speak. They just lay in the dark and listened to Hogwarts sounding like itself, fully, for what might have been the first time in 60 years. Friday came with hard, clear winter light, the kind of December day that is cold enough to be honest about it. Harry arrived at the Ministry of Magic through the flue in Dumbledore's office at 9:15, accompanied by Dumbledore, with Ironclaw and Sharp Fong already waiting in the atrium. The hearing room in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was paneled in dark wood and arranged around a raised central floor where the person making the claim would stand. 5 Wizengamot members in their plum robes sat at the high bench. The Ancient Heritage Office was represented by a small, precise woman named Marchbanks who looked ancient in the way of someone who has simply decided to keep going indefinitely. Lucius Malfoy sat in the observer's gallery with 2 other board members whose names Harry didn't know yet. He looked at Harry when Harry entered with the specific attention of a man who has thought carefully about Wednesday evening and has not yet finished thinking. Harry stood at the center of the floor. Sharp Fong stood beside him, a sheaf of documents in hand, radiating the particular energy of a goblin who is well prepared and would enjoy it if someone attempted to challenge him. Marchbanks looked at Harry over the rim of her spectacles. Harry James Potter. You have filed an Emery's heir claim on the basis of Merlinian descent through your maternal line, and an Atlantean heritage claim on the basis of blood ritual results conducted at Gringotts Bank. Is this correct? Yes, Harry said. The documentation has been reviewed by this panel, Marchbanks said. The Gringotts authentication is accepted as standard. The blood ritual results have been verified by the Ministry's own Heritage Division. The Merlinian succession genealogy has been traced and confirmed by the Ancient Records Department. She paused, and looked at him over her spectacles in the way that someone looks at a thing they're still assimilating. The claim is verified, Mr. Potter. The Emery's seat on the Wizengamot is formally recognized as active. Given your current age, a proxy holder will serve until you reach majority. I'd like to nominate Ironclaw of Gringotts as proxy, Harry said. In the observer's gallery, someone made a small sound. Harry didn't look to see who. A goblin proxy, said one of the Wizengamot members, a heavy-set man whose expression suggested this had not been in any version of events he'd anticipated. The Emery's seat would be held in trust by a representative of Gringotts Bank, Ancient Accounts Division, Sharp Fong said, with the precision of someone dropping a legal document from a height. This is entirely within the provisions of the Emery Succession Charter, Section 4, Paragraph 8, which specifies that the proxy holder must be a representative of an institution with a continuous operational history of no less than 1,000 years. Gringotts was founded in 1474. The Ironclaw family has held accounts in continuous operation since. That satisfies the requirement, Marchbanks said, with a firmness that closed the discussion cleanly. She looked at the heavy-set Wizengamot member until he looked back at his papers. Then she looked at Harry again. Additionally, you have submitted a formal complaint under the Emery Succession Charter regarding the suppression of your magical heritage. The documentation from Gringotts includes a dated record of the suppression enchantments and their author. Yes, Harry said. The room was very quiet. The author of those suppressions, Marchbanks said carefully, is the current headmaster of Hogwarts. Yes, Harry said. I'm aware of that. And I want to be precise about what I'm asking for. He could feel Dumbledore behind him, in the gallery on the opposite side from Malfoy, still and attentive. I'm not filing for punitive action. I'm filing to establish a legal precedent. Under the Emery's Charter, the suppression of a blood heir's magical heritage without consent constitutes an act of aggression against the line. I want that established on record. I want it to be law, formally, so that it cannot happen to anyone else. Marchbanks looked at him over her spectacles for a long moment. You're not seeking consequences for Albus Dumbledore. He has removed the suppressions from Hogwarts foundations. He has acknowledged what was done. He is, Harry paused, finding the right word, someone I intend to continue working with. He held Marchbanks' gaze. What I'm seeking is structural change. Make it illegal, formally and permanently, for any institution or individual to suppress magical heritage without the documented, informed consent of the heir in question. That's the ask. Marchbanks picked up her quill. The panel will deliberate, she said. The claimant is invited to take a seat. The deliberation took 40 minutes, during which Sharpfong reviewed additional documentation with two of the Wisengamot members, and Ironclaw stood very still in the manner of someone who has been waiting for this particular day for approximately 300 years. In the observers' gallery, Lucius Malfoy had moved to sit closer to the front. Harry was watching him from his seat below, not constantly but periodically, reading the quality of his attention. Malfoy was listening to the panel's questions to the Heritage Office representatives with the focused interest of someone who is not here to obstruct but to understand. Whatever he'd come with on Wednesday, whatever framework he'd intended to apply to Harry Potter, it was being dismantled and rebuilt in real time, and Harry found the process genuinely interesting. Malfoy caught him watching. Held his gaze. Then gave him a slight, precise nod, not deference, not submission, but the acknowledgement of one person who moves at the level of institutional architecture to another. Harry returned it. When the panel came back, Marchbanks spoke for 6 minutes. The precedent was established. The law was written. No magical heritage could be suppressed without documented, informed consent of the heir. Violations were subject to Wisengamot review. The Emery's heir claim was formally active. The seat would be held in proxy by Ironclaw until Harry reached majority. One more thing, Marchbanks said, and her voice had an edge of something almost dry. The Ministry notes, for the formal record, that the Atlantean heritage reading of 55% represents the highest documented Atlantean blood concentration in recorded Ministry history. She looked at Harry. We thought you should know that officially. I appreciate the precision, Harry said. Back at Hogwarts that evening, the last evening before students left for the Christmas holiday, the common room had the particular energy of a place full of people who are about to be somewhere else and are already partly there in their heads. Trunks being packed, owls sent home, Fred and George organizing something in a corner with the concentration of people who have identified an opportunity. Harry sat in the armchair by the fire and felt the castle around him, clean, now, the foundations no longer dampening the ambient resonance, Hogwarts sounding like itself, and thought about the day. Hermione came and sat in the armchair across from him, tucking her legs under her with a cup of tea, and said, "How did it go?" "Well," Harry said. "The precedent. Established." "And Dumbledore?" "Still the headmaster," Harry said. "Still the most important magical mind in Britain, probably. Still someone I intend to have Thursday evenings with." He paused. "He did something wrong and he's going to live with it, and what matters now is what comes after." Hermione looked into her tea. "That's a very mature position for someone who has considerable cause to be angry." "I'm 11, Harry said. "I keep telling myself that," she said. "It keeps being insufficient." She looked up at him. "What happens now?" "With Quirrell, with Voldemort, with the stone?" "We let it develop," Harry said. "Quirrell is working towards something. When he moves, we'll know." "And you'll handle it," Harry said, with the simple certainty of someone who has assessed the situation and is comfortable with their assessment. She held his gaze for a moment. "You know I'm going to want to be part of that." "I know. And you're not going to try to protect me out of it." "You'd be more dangerous left out than included," Harry said. "I'm aware of that." The smile that produced was the real one, the bright unself-conscious one she usually kept inside the more composed version. "Good," she said. Ron appeared with his chest set and the expression of someone who has been losing to Hermione repeatedly and has yet to identify this as a pattern. "Rematch," he said. "Always," Hermione said, and unfolded herself from the chair. Harry watched them set up and felt the warmth of the room and the clean resonance of the castle and thought about everything that had been moved today, the law changed, the precedent set, the architecture of a system built for control shifted fractionally towards something more honest. Not finished. Not even close. But moved. He thought about Neville, who was upstairs packing and who had spent the last week practicing magic with the new grip and the new understanding and the expression of someone finding out who they actually were, which was one of the better things Harry had seen at Hogwarts. He thought about Quirrell and the cold presence in the back of his head, waiting and patient and beginning to notice things. He thought about Voldemort learning, in due course, that what he was dealing with was not a boy with a scar and a legend. That it was something considerably older and considerably less manageable than that. He found he was looking forward to it. Not out of arrogance. Not out of a need for the confrontation. But because he knew what he was, finally, completely, without the dam and without the suppressions and without anyone else's architecture defining the shape of it. He was 55% Atlantean and 45% Merlin's heir and 100% himself, and himself was more than enough for whatever came. The fire crackled. Outside, snow fell on the Hogwarts grounds, on the lake and the forbidden forest and the stone towers, patient and deep and utterly indifferent to the things that happened inside walls. Inside, in the common room, Ron moved a knight and said, "There," with the confidence of someone who has just made a catastrophic mistake, and Hermione looked at the board with the expression of someone who has seen 3 moves ahead and is deciding how long to wait before demonstrating it. Harry opened his book. The castle breathed. Everything was in motion, and motion, for the first time in his life, was entirely his own. Chapter 6, The Sea Remembers Its Children. Christmas at Hogwarts was quieter than Harry expected and better than he'd imagined. He stayed. He'd known he would from the moment the sign-up sheet appeared on the common room notice board. There was nothing at Privet Drive worth returning to, and everything here was worth staying for. Ron stayed too, which surprised Harry until Ron explained that his parents were visiting his brother Charlie in Romania and the twins had elected to go and Ginny was too young, and the whole thing had the comfortable logic of a family that makes decisions collectively and assumes everyone is on board. Neville went home to his grandmother, which was the right choice. He'd written to her the week before, a careful letter that Harry had seen him draft 3 times, telling her about the Charms classroom and the cracked bench and what Harry had told him about Longwater. He'd shown Harry the letter before sending it. It was good, honest without being alarming, specific without being overwhelming, written in the voice of someone who finally had the right vocabulary for things he'd always known were there. Harry had told him so. Neville had folded the letter and sent it with the look of someone dropping a stone into still water and waiting to see what rings it made. The reply came 2 days later and was 8 pages long, in a handwriting that pressed deep into the parchment. Neville read it in the common room with his face doing approximately 11 different things in the span of 10 minutes, and when he finished he just sat very still for a while. Then he looked at Harry and said, "She says she has books. She says she's had books since before my father was born. She says she was waiting for the right time." A pause. "She sounds like she's been waiting a long time." "They usually are," Harry said. "She also says," Neville stopped, swallowed. "She says my father would have known what to make of all this. She says he looked back at the letter, the kind of person who understood old things." Harry didn't say anything. Neville didn't need him to. He folded the letter with the care of something precious and put it in his trunk, and the next morning on the platform he'd had a directness in his posture that hadn't been there in September, walking toward his grandmother's embrace with the bearing of someone who knows their own ground. So, Christmas. Harry and Ron and a few Ravenclaws and a Hufflepuff 5th year named Cedric Diggory who was good-natured and genuinely funny, which Harry hadn't expected. The castle at Christmas was extraordinary. Quieter, the magic somehow more present without the ambient noise of 500 students, the decorations doing the things decorations do when they have more space to do them in. 12 trees in the great hall, enchanted snow in the corridors, and on Christmas morning a pile of presents at the foot of Harry's bed that was the first he'd received in his life and which he opened sitting cross-legged in his dormitory while Ron made the sounds of someone receiving exactly the wrong size jumper for the 4th consecutive year. Hermione had sent a book, predictably and perfectly, on Atlantean cartography, which was a field Harry hadn't known existed and immediately wanted to know everything about. Ron gave him a box of Honeydukes chocolates the size of a small building. Ironclaw had sent a formal notification that the Emery's proxy documents were fully executed, which was not festive but was deeply satisfying. And at the bottom of the pile, a small, flat package wrapped in silver paper with no card. Inside was a cloak. Liquid light, weightless, the color of air. Harry held it and felt it and knew immediately what it was in the way he knew things now, through the blood, through the resonance. Invisibility cloak. Old, extraordinary, the oldest and most perfect invisibility work he'd ever felt in any object. And beneath the craft of the cloak, a deeper signature, a lineage, familiar in the way family is familiar. His father's. His father's family's. Ancient work, something carried for generations, and whoever had sent it now, at Christmas, without a card. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put it on and sat in the middle of his dormitory and felt completely invisible and thought about James Potter, who had apparently been the kind of person who owned something extraordinary and used it for adventures rather than leverage, which told Harry something about him that he filed away carefully in the part of himself that was building a picture of his parents from the outside in. He wore it that night and walked the castle. Not to spy, not to explore secret passages, just to walk through Hogwarts in the quiet and feel it without the daytime context of classes and corridors and the social navigation of being Harry Potter. The castle at night was a different place, stiller, more itself, the magic in the stones more present and less filtered. He walked through the library and along the 7th floor and down to the dungeons, feeling the resonance of each part of the school, the distinct magical quality of each space. He found the mirror in a room on the 3rd floor, behind a door that was not quite closed. He felt it before he opened the door, a peculiar magic, looping, self-referential, dense with emotional resonance, the magical signature of something built to do something very specific and very complicated to the human mind. He stepped inside. The mirror was floor to ceiling, framed in gold, with an inscription along the top that he read twice before he understood it was a reversal, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He looked into it. He had expected, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. His parents, probably. The obvious answer, the thing the mirror would have given him in September before the ritual, before the month in the leaky cauldron, before the hearing and the charms classroom and Dumbledore's honest evenings. The grief he carried for people he'd never known. What he saw was himself. Standing in the mirror exactly as he stood in front of it, alone, with the invisibility cloak pooled at his feet and his wand in his hand and his face clear and untroubled. Just himself. He looked at it for a long time, at this reflection that the mirror had decided was his heart's desire, and felt something in his chest that was not pride and not satisfaction but something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a thing completed. He had spent 11 years being told, implicitly and explicitly, that what he was wasn't enough or was too much or was the wrong shape, and the deepest wish he apparently carried was simply to be what he already was. He'd already won, in the way that mattered most. He walked away from the mirror without looking back. January came with cold that had opinions about it and classes resuming and the particular energy of a new term, the sense of things being in motion again. Harry returned to Hogwarts on the train from London and Hermione sat across from him and told him about every book she'd read over the holiday in rapid sequential summary while Ron ate crisps and listened with the expression of someone who finds this extremely normal by now, which it was. Neville came back different. Not dramatically, not transformed in any obvious external way. The same round face, the same careful voice, the same fundamental Neville-ness that was one of Harry's favorite qualities in a person. But there was something behind his eyes that hadn't been there in December. A settledness. The same thing Harry had seen in his posture on the platform, but deeper now, more integrated. 8 pages of his grandmother's handwriting in 2 weeks of holiday with the books she'd been keeping. He sat down in the compartment and pulled out a text that Harry recognized, an old Wizarding Family's compendium, the kind with actual lineage information rather than the sanitized version the Ministry maintained, and opened it with the ease of someone who has found a thing they've been looking for. The long bottom line goes back, Neville said, without preamble, further than the official records show. My gran found the primary genealogy in the family vault. He turned the book to show Harry a page of very old script. There's a notation here about a connection to one of the Atlantean tributary families. Not direct descent, she says, more like a lateral line, through a marriage about 15 generations back. He paused. She says that's where the long water comes from. That tracks with what the texts describe, Harry said, leaning over to look. The tributary families weren't Atlantean themselves, but they had sustained contact with the civilization, and the magic transferred through proximity and intermarriage over generations. He traced the script with one finger. This notation here, he pointed, reading the Atlantean characters in the margin, it says Friend of the Deep. That's the formal tributary designation. Neville looked at where Harry's finger rested. You can read that? Yes. What else does it say? Harry read the full marginal notation, translated as he went. It says the Friend of the Deep designation carries a specific gift, the ability to hear the earth rather than the water. Where Atlantean descendants sense through water and aquifer and deep ocean, the tributary families sense through root and stone and growing things. It says, he paused, reading more carefully, it says the gift is not lesser. Only different. Different in the way that a root is different from a river. Both go to the same deep place. Neville was quiet for the entirety of the rest of that sentence. Then he said, that's why I'm good in herbology. That's why you're good in herbology, Harry said. Ron looked between them and then out the window and back. Right, he said. So Neville's also ancient and magical in ways none of us knew. He seemed to be doing arithmetic. I'm starting to feel like the normal one. You're the one who knows every Quidditch statistic since 1847 and can play chess at a level that frightens professional players, Hermione said, without looking up from her book. Normal is relative. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Appeared to decide this was a compliment. Fair enough, he said. The thing with Quirrell came to a head in March. Harry had been watching it build since January, the double resonance growing heavier, the cold presence in the back of Quirrell's head more active, more agitated. Something had changed. Whatever was in the school that Quirrell's passenger wanted, the access to it was not as simple as it had initially seemed. The protections on the third floor were holding. And whoever had designed them, Harry suspected Dumbledore plus significant input from several other teachers, had made them deep enough that brute force wouldn't work and careful enough that a simple Alohommer would get you past exactly the first door and no further. What changed in March was that Quirrell started watching Harry. Not the ambient monitoring Harry had been aware of since September, this was direct, deliberate, the cold presence behind Quirrell's eyes turning its full attention outward toward Harry in a way that was specific and assessing. It had figured out that Harry was more than it expected. It was recalculating. Harry noted the change and mentioned it to no one except Hermione, who noted it in her record of everything they'd observed about Quirrell since September, which was thorough enough to have been a ministry surveillance file. It knows what you are now, she said. Not the full picture, Harry said. But enough to know the original calculation was wrong. What will it do? Attempt to use me, Harry said. Or remove me. Depending on whether it decides I'm an asset or a threat. Which are you? Right now? He thought about it seriously. Probably both, and it hasn't decided how to weight them yet. The specific moment came on a Wednesday night in the second week of March. Harry was in the library, alone, Hermione had gone to bed at 11, Ron had been asleep since 9, the library was officially closed, but Madame Pants had developed a pragmatic policy of ignoring Harry Potter after hours on the grounds that he was always reading something and never making a mess of it. He was working through the cartography book Hermione had sent at Christmas and thinking about the way Atlantean spatial magic encoded direction as resonance frequency rather than coordinate, when the library door opened. Quirrell walked in. Without the stammer. Without the wide-eyed anxious performance. The body was Quirrell's, but the walk was different, smooth, direct, the body moving as though it belonged to someone who didn't have Quirrell's habitual hesitation. He stopped 6 feet from Harry's table and looked at him. You know, the voice said. Still Quirrell's voice, but with something else running through it, a colder harmonic underneath. Don't you? Yes, Harry said. He closed the cartography book and set it to one side. He didn't reach for his wand. Since the welcoming feast. And you've said nothing. I was waiting to see what you'd do, Harry said. A pause. The cold harmonic in the voice shifted slightly, assessing. You are not what I was told you were, it said. What I knew you were. The last word landed on knew with a weight that suggested it had been very certain, once. No, Harry agreed. 55% Atlantean. The way it said it, not a question, not surprise exactly, more like a scientist revising an experiment that has produced unexpected results. Gringotts. The heritage hearing. The legal precedent. A pause. Dumbledore's suppressions removed. You've been thorough, Harry said. I am always thorough, the voice said. It is one of the few things that has remained constant. Something moved through the cold harmonic, not warmth, but a kind of ancient exhaustion, the tone of something that has been continuous for a very long time and is beginning to feel the weight of it. The stone, it said. I need it. You know this. I know. And you are not going to let me have it. No, Harry said simply. Because Dumbledore has asked you to stop me. Because I've decided to stop you, Harry said. Dumbledore didn't ask. I observed the situation, assessed it, and decided. Another pause. The cold presence was very still, the stillness of something thinking fast and carefully. Harry held its attention without flinching, without aggression, with the specific quality of presence that the Atlantean texts described as the deep face, the expression of water when it is very deep and very still and you are looking at what is on the bottom rather than at your own reflection. You are 11 years old, the voice said. And it wasn't contemptuous. It was almost thoughtful. I am, Harry said. And I'm 55% Atlantean and 45% Merlin's heir and I'm sitting in this library at midnight because I felt you making this decision about 20 minutes ago and wanted to be here when you arrived. He met the cold gaze evenly. I know what you're calculating. Whether I'm more useful to you alive and potentially recruited, or removed as a future obstacle. I want to tell you that both of those calculations are built on a misunderstanding. Which is? I'm not going to be recruited and I'm not going to be removed, Harry said. Not because I'm protected or because I'm relying on anyone else to protect me. Because I'm genuinely not afraid of you, and things that aren't afraid of you don't respond to either of those approaches the way you expect them to. The silence stretched. Your mother's blood, the voice said, after a long moment. The Merlinian line. The protection charm she cast. Yes. I felt it, 11 years ago. It was, a pause that felt, oddly, like something genuine, unlike anything I had encountered. A magic built entirely from intention rather than technique. No structure, no framework, just, it stopped. Love, Harry said. That's what you felt. It is an imprecise word. It's the only accurate one. The cold harmonic shifted again, and Harry watched Quirrell's face with attention, reading the two presences, the terrified, hollowed professor and the ancient, cold, brilliant thing inhabiting the space he'd left, and felt, for the first time, something he hadn't expected to feel in this conversation. Pity. Not for the cold voice. For Quirrell, who had been consumed by something that had needed a vessel and had found him and had not, Harry suspected, left him much of himself. You need to leave this building, Harry said. Not a threat. Not a demand. The simple statement of someone explaining the relevant facts. What you're looking for isn't here in the way you think it is. The stone is protected by more than wards. The last protection was designed so that only someone who wants it but doesn't intend to use it can retrieve it. That's not you. That's not any version of you. He held the cold gaze. You know this. You've known it since you got here. A very long silence. What are you, Harry Potter? The voice said, and it was the first time it had used his name, and the way it said it was not quite what he'd expected, not hostile, not calculating. Something closer to genuine curiosity, the curiosity of a very old, very intelligent mind encountering something genuinely new. "Exactly what I said I was," Harry said. "Nothing less than that." The cold presence sat in the library, in the body of the consumed professor, and looked at the 11-year-old boy across the table who was not afraid and was not performing and was not reaching for his wand, and something in its ancient calculation shifted fractionally in a direction that wasn't surrender and wasn't retreat but was, perhaps, the first genuine acknowledgement it had made in years of anything it couldn't simply override. "This is not finished," it said. "No," Harry agreed. "But tonight it is." Quirrell turned and left the library. Harry sat at the table for a moment after the door closed, in the quiet of the empty room, and then he picked up the cartography book and found his page. He'd been reading about the way Atlantean navigators encoded home into the resonance of a stone and could feel their way back to it from anywhere in the known ocean, and he thought about the word home and what it meant now, and felt the castle around him full and clean and sounding like itself, and thought, yes. This. He read for another hour before going to bed. He told Dumbledore the next Thursday. All of it, the library, the conversation, the assessment he'd made about the cold presence's current state. Dumbledore listened without interruption, which Harry had learned to recognize as the sign that something genuinely surprised him. "He spoke with you," Dumbledore said, when Harry finished. "Directly. As himself." "As itself," Harry said. "Yes." "And he," Dumbledore paused. "Withdrew." "For now," Harry said. "He's recalculating. He knows the stone is beyond his reach this year and he knows that I'm aware of him and he knows that I'm not a manageable problem." He paused. "He's also," he tried to find the right word, "curious about me. In a way I didn't expect." "Tom was always most dangerous when he was curious," Dumbledore said quietly. "He was also asking questions about my mother," Harry said. "About the blood protection. He felt it 11 years ago and he didn't understand it then. He still doesn't understand it." He looked at Dumbledore carefully. "I think that's significant." "It is," Dumbledore said. "It is, Harry, very much so." He looked at Harry with those complicated blue eyes and something in his expression was weighted in a way that Harry recognized, the weight of things he knew that he hadn't told Harry yet, the things on the timeline, the things he was still managing. "There is more," he said. "To the story of Tom and what happened the night your parents died. Things I will tell you. Not tonight, not because I'm withholding them, but because there are pieces that are not yet certain, and I will not tell you uncertain things as though they are facts." "When they're certain," Harry said. "When they're certain," Dumbledore agreed. "All right," Harry said. He meant it. The honest timeline was something he could work with. Fawkes trilled from his perch, a low, perfect note that filled the office with warmth, and Harry felt the bird's golden gaze on him and the resonance between them that had been there since the first night, that quality of kinship between deep magic things that recognized each other across the distinction of their forms. "Can I ask you something?" Harry said. "Of course." "The night my parents died. Were you close?" "Could you have?" "No," Dumbledore said. Immediately, without space for interpretation. "I was not close. I did not know it was happening until it was done. If I had known," he stopped. "I have asked myself that question for 10 years, Harry. I don't know the answer. I believe I would have come. I believe I would have tried. What I would have been able to do," he shook his head. "I don't know." "All right," Harry said again. He believed him. He also believed the uncertainty was genuine and that Dumbledore's inability to answer the question with confidence was its own kind of honest. He went back to the dormitory through the quiet castle, the stones warm underfoot in the way old stones get warm when they've been lived in long enough, and he stood at the window of the dormitory for a while and looked out at the grounds, at the lake dark and still under the March sky, at the forbidden forest, at the grounds that were beginning to turn toward spring. He thought about Voldemort in the library, curious and cold. He thought about the philosopher's stone sitting behind its protections, beyond the reach of anyone who wanted to use it. He thought about the conversation that was not finished and would continue in some other year, in some other form, on some other ground. He was not afraid of it. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. Not brave in the sense of suppressing fear. Actually not afraid, in the way that you are not afraid of a storm when you are the deep water and the storm is only the surface. He had been given the shape of what was coming and he had looked at it clearly and he knew his own dimensions and they were more than enough. In April, Hermione asked him what he was thinking about. They were by the lake, the two of them, a Saturday afternoon, the weather finally warm enough to mean it. She had her notes and he had the Atlantean cartography text and they'd been sitting in companionable quiet for an hour when she asked. "The water," he said. She looked at the lake. "What about it?" "The giant squid. There's a resonance in the deep part of the lake that I've been feeling since September. I kept thinking it was part of the school's ambient magic, but it's not." He looked at the dark surface of the water. "It's old. Very old. Older than the school. Pre-Hogwarts," she said immediately, sitting forward. "A natural magical site. That's why the founders built here." "That's part of it," Harry said. "But there's something specific in the resonance. A signature I recognize from the Atlantean texts." He paused. "I think there's something at the bottom of this lake. Not an object. Not a thing. A place. Like," he searched for it, "like a confluence. A place where old Atlantean power is concentrated in the physical geography." Hermione looked at the lake with the expression of someone whose reading list has just added itself to. "Have you told Dumbledore?" "Not yet." "Are you going to?" "Yes. When I understand it better." He looked at the water. "There's no urgency. Whatever is down there has been down there for a very long time and isn't going anywhere." She looked at him with the particular expression she used when she was deciding whether to say something. Then she said it. "Harry. What do you think you're going to become?" "What do you mean?" "When you're older. When you've got the full picture of the inheritance, and the Emery seat is yours, and the legal architecture is in place, and you've dealt with Voldemort, what do you think you'll do? What do you want?" He had thought about this. Not obsessively, not constantly, but it had been in the background of everything since the ritual, the question of what power is for when you're not afraid of anything and don't need it to feel safe and don't want to use it as currency. "I want to change how the wizarding world thinks about heritage," he said. "Not just the legal structure, Sharp Fong and Iron Claw can handle the legal structure. I mean the actual way people understand what they carry. The number of people in this school alone who have something deep and old in their blood that they don't know about because the knowledge was suppressed or lost or just, allowed to go quiet." He looked at the lake. "My mother didn't know what she was. Neville didn't know what he was. How many more people are there like that?" "Hundreds," Hermione said. "Probably thousands, across generations. And the ones who did know, families like the Malfoys, who knew they carried old blood but understood it as a reason for hierarchy rather than a form of responsibility." He turned the cartography book over in his hands. "Power isn't about hierarchy. It's about depth. About having access to more of what reality actually is. That should make you more connected to things, not more separate from them." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "That's not a political platform," she said. "That's a philosophy." "Maybe both," Harry said. She thought about it. "I want to help with that," she said, with the direct simplicity that was one of her best qualities. "Not can I help, not I'd like to help, I want to." Present tense, decided. "I know," Harry said. "You already are." The end of term came with exams, which Harry moved through with the same clean efficiency he brought to most things, and the Quidditch Cup, which Gryffindor won by a margin large enough to make Wood's celebration somewhat alarming in its intensity, and the long warm evenings of June that made the castle feel different, lighter, the stones themselves seeming to breathe more easily in the long northern light. On the last Thursday of term, Harry went to Dumbledore's office. The Philosopher's Stone had been moved, Harry had felt it 3 weeks ago, the particular magic of it leaving the building, and had noted it and said nothing, understanding the move as Dumbledore's response to the March Library conversation. Safe now. Beyond reach. Quirrell had deteriorated visibly since March. He'd missed 2 weeks of classes with what McGonagall described as a severe illness and had come back thinner and more hollowed-looking, the performance of timidity having become harder to maintain because there was less of the person underneath it to perform. Whatever the cold presence was doing to him, the slow consumption of the vessel was accelerating. Harry watched him in the corridors and felt the double resonance diminishing, not the cold part, which remained as sharp as ever, but the human part, Quirrell's own signature, fading like a fire going out. He told Dumbledore. "I know," Dumbledore said. "There isn't long now. He'll attempt the stone regardless of where it is, the need is too urgent." A pause. "Or he'll leave. Find another path." "He'll leave," Harry said. "He doesn't know where you've moved it and he knows I'll be here and he's decided," he stopped, feeling for it, the quality of the cold presence's decision, he's decided this isn't the year. He's patient. He was always patient. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Yes, that is one of his most enduring qualities. When he comes back," Harry said, "he'll be better prepared for what I am." "Undoubtedly. So will I," Harry said. Dumbledore smiled, and it was the real one, the full one, without the management behind it. The smile of a man who has spent a year being consistently surprised by a student and has arrived at genuine admiration. "I believe that is very probably true," he said. They sat in companionable quiet for a moment, the fire burning, Fawkes singing very softly to himself on his perch. "I want to ask you something," Harry said. "About my parents." "Ask," Dumbledore said. "Were they happy?" Before, he paused. "Were they happy?" A long moment. "Yes," Dumbledore said, and his voice was different now, quieter and more careful, the way people are careful with things they love. "Very. They were extraordinary people individually and together they were." He looked at the fire. "James was incandescent. There is no better word. Everything he did with his whole self. And your mother," he paused. "Lily had the quality of making whatever room she was in feel like the most important room in the world. Not through force of personality, but through genuine attention. She made you feel that you mattered, and she meant it every time." He looked at Harry. "You have that. Both of those things, actually. In you, somehow, they've become a single quality. The incandescence and the attention at once." Harry held this carefully, the way you hold things that are both beautiful and painful. He thought about the mirror at Christmas, the reflection of himself that was his own heart's desire. He thought about what it would have been like to have been raised by people like that. He let himself feel the weight of it without rushing past it. "Thank you," he said, quietly. "Thank you for asking," Dumbledore said. "I have wanted to tell you for quite some time." He took the train back to London on the 1st of July with Ron and Hermione and all the noise and warmth of the end of a school year, trunks everywhere, owls objecting, someone near the front of the train apparently attempting to smuggle a garden gnome, which led to periodic alarming sounds and a consensus to stay in their compartment. They played Exploding Snap and talked about summer, and Hermione made everyone agree to a structured reading schedule for the holidays with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely believes the world will be better if it is more organized, and Ron agreed to everything while clearly planning to read approximately 1/3 of the suggested material, and Harry agreed because he'd been planning to read most of it anyway. Neville had boarded at the platform with his grandmother, who had looked at Harry over Neville's shoulder with the sharp, dark eyes of a woman who had been holding information for a long time and had recently passed it on, and who wanted to see the person responsible for the question that had finally asked for it. She'd studied him for a long moment. Then she'd given him a single precise nod that contained, Harry thought, a great deal. He'd nodded back. The train moved through the countryside in the long summer light, and Harry sat with the window open and felt the breeze on his face and thought about everything the year had been. The ritual and the reckoning. The weight of old names. The sorting and Quirrell's double resonance and Neville's cracked bench and the troll and the library at midnight and the hearing and Dumbledore's honest face. He thought about the word withheld and how he'd sat in a cupboard in Surrey reading it on a moving seal in the dark on his birthday, and how that boy and this boy were the same person, and how the same person could feel so different on the inside when they'd been given accurate information about themselves. He thought about what the mirror had shown him, himself, simply himself, and he thought the mirror was right, and that this was still what he wanted most, to be entirely and accurately himself, without the dam, without the architecture built to make him manageable, without the cupboard and the suppressions and the careful 10-year plan. He was that now. He was that, and the year ahead would build on it, and the year after that would build further, and somewhere in the shape of those years was Voldemort returning with a better calculation, and somewhere was the full scope of the Atlantean inheritance understood and claimed, and somewhere was the confluence at the bottom of the Hogwarts lake waiting to be understood, and somewhere was the Emery's seat, and the law changed and the world shifted fractionally toward honesty. He was not afraid of any of it. He was the deep water. He was the old name. He was 55% of something that had been waiting in the bones of the earth for someone to carry it again, and 45% of the most powerful named wizard in recorded history, and 100% the son of two people who had been happy, genuinely and completely happy, before the world had interrupted them. He was Harry. He put his hand out the window and felt the summer air move through his fingers, the speed of the train, the bright ordinary fact of being in motion under a clear sky, and Hermione was arguing with Ron about chess, and the countryside was green and enormous, and Hedwig was asleep in her cage with the composed dignity of someone who has a great deal of confidence in how things are going to turn out. The train moved south toward London and everything that waited beyond it. The sea remembers its children. And its children remember the sea.